Section 16 of a Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by S.S. Kim, Seoul, South Korea. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woods Rogers. Mexico described. I shall next give a brief account of Mexico from the best information and others. This country lies betwixt latitude 8 and 50 or 55 north, but it is little known or inhabited by the Spaniards to the northward of 35. It is divided into Old and New, and the former is also called New Spain. The country in general includes all the west side of Northern America, as far as it is known. It is divided into audiencias, or jurisdictions of Santo Domingo, Mexico properly so called, Guadalajara or New Galicia, and Guatemala, and these again are subdivided into several provinces, with which I shall not trouble the reader, since that is the business of a geographer, and not of a sailor. That part of it called New Spain is the best and most famous part of all North America, and the name is sometimes extended by the Spaniards to the whole. The air in general is mild, temperate, and healthful, and the soil so fertile that in some places it produced 100 for one of corn, and of maize 200, but the great rains in summer hinder their having good oil and wine. The most remarkable plant is that called maguey, which abounds in this country, and some of it we found in the Maria Islands. Of the juice, the Spaniards and natives make a small wine, vinegar and honey, and of the leaves and other parts they make cordage, thread and cloth for sacks and shirts. They have great and small cattle and fowl in such plenty that they frequently kill them only for the skins and feathers. They have also excellent horses of the best Spanish breed. There are few gold mines in this country, but abundance of silver, and though not so rich as those of Peru, are much easier to be worked with less expense of money, and far less danger of men's lives. The other cheap commodities are iron, steel, copper, but none of them much wrought, hides, wool, cotton, sugar, silk, cochineal, scarlet dye, feathers, honey, wax, balm, ambergris, salt, abundance of medicinal drugs, cocoa, cassia, gold in sands of their rivers, figs, oranges, citrons, and other fruits peculiar to the climates. Besides all this common in Europe, wild beasts and fowl of all sorts, crystal, turquoise, emeralds, marcasites, bezoar stones, and pepper. This must be understood of Mexico in general, for all those commodities are not in one province, but some have one sort and some another. Nor is the temper of the climates everywhere the same, for those places toward the South Sea are warm, but in and about the mountains it is cold, and in some places they have continued rain almost for 8 or 9 months in a year, and are much infected with serpents, mosquitoes, and other insects, especially near the torrid zone. I shall not swell my book with the fabulous accounts of the origin of the ancient Mexicans, which are shocking to common sense, nor pretend to give the reader the history of their kings, because it is not my business. Besides, it would puzzle the ablest critic to distinguish betwixt the truth and falsehood in those pretended histories, preserved by fanciful hieroglyphics, which will bear what sense any author pleases to impose upon them. Therefore I shall only say in general that the Spanish authors who write of these countries says the kings of Mexico were very potent, that they had 25 or 30 petty kings their tributaries, that their ordinary guards did usually consist of 2,000 or 3,000 men, and that on occasion they could raise 20 or 30,000, that their palaces were magnificent, their temples sumptuous, and their worship barbarous, it being ordinary for them to sacrifice their enemies and sometimes their own subjects. The natives of old Mexico say they are not of that race of people, but that their ancestors came from diverse nations who inhabited the northern part of the continent, and particularly that called New Mexico, and by the account of their historians give of their travels to settle here, it would seem those who composed the story had heard something of the travel of the children of Israel in the wilderness, and designed to write something like it, and by calling their leader Maxi, they would make his name resemble that of Moses. It was a long time before they united into one monarchy, for Montezuma, who reigned when Fernando Cortés invaded them, was only the ninth in their catalogue. The divisions among the natives and the hatred which the neighboring princes bore to their kings made the conquest of Mexico much easier to the Spaniards than they expected, so that in the bishopric of Los Angeles and so on, there are many thousands of Indians exempt from extraordinary taxes because their ancestors assisted the Spaniards in the conquest of the country. The natives of Mexico, properly so called, are the most civilized, industrious, and ingenious. They are noted for admirable colors in their paintings, though their figures are not so proportionable. They draw them with the feathers of their cincons, a small bird which they say lives only upon dew. They make use of certain characters instead of letters of the alphabet, by which they have preserved some fragment of their history. The Spanish governor of Mexico, our author says, with much difficulty got it out of the hands of the natives, with an explanation in their own language, and had it translated into Spanish. The ship in which it was sent to the Emperor Charles V being taken by a French ship, the manuscript fell into the hands of the Andrew Thevet at Paris, from whose heirs our Hakluyt, being then almoner to the English ambassador, purchased it. Sir Walter Raleigh got it translated into English, and the learned Sir Henry Spelman prevailed with the purchase to get the figures engraven. They represent princes and others in several postures, and bring down the history from the year 1324 to the beginning or middle of the 16th century or thereabouts. This history is divided into three parts. The first contains little but an account of the names and conquest of their princes, with the summary of their vices and virtues, so that it is not worth insisting upon. The second has an account of the tributes paid by the people, which were proportions of the products of the country for provisions, clothes, arms, warlike habits and ornaments, paper and household furnitures. The third gives an account of the economy, customs and discipline of Mexicans, which, because they are odd enough, I shall give a short account of the most remarkable. 4 days after a child was born, the midwife carried it to the yard of the house, laid it upon the rushes, and after washing it, desired 3 boys, who were there at a sort of feast, to name it how they pleased. If it was a boy, she put into its hands the tools belonging to his father's employment, and if a soldier, his arms. If it was a girl, she put the distaff or other utensils of women by it. If the boy was designed for the church, they carried it to a temple with the present when of a sufficient age, and left it with the high priest to be educated, and if designed for war, they carried him to an officer to teach him the use of arms. The parents corrected them by blows, or pricking them with needles made of maguey trees. The father pricked the boys, if unlucky, all over their body, and the mother pricked her daughters only in the fist. When the boys were pretty well grown, they tied them hand and foot, and laid them in muddy water, naked a whole day, and then their mothers took them out and cleaned them at night. When a maid was to be married, the marriage-maker carried her on his back to the bridegroom's house. 4 women bearing torches before her, the bridegroom's friends received her in a yard or court, carried her to a room, and set her down by him on a mat, and tied the skirts of their garments together, offered incense to their idols, and had 4 old men and women to be witnesses. After a feast, the witnesses exhort them to live well together, and so the ceremony concluded. The priest trained up their novices in sweeping the temples, carrying branches and so on to adorn them, to make seeds of cane, to bring needles or thorns of maguey to draw blood for sacrifices, and shrubs to keep a perpetual fire, and if they failed in their duty, returned to their parents, or were catched with women, they pricked them with those needles. One of the chief priests went by night to a mountain where he did penance, carried fire and perfume to sacrifice to the devil, and was always attended by a novice. Others of the priests played on musical instruments by night, and some of them observed the stars and told the hours. The novices arrived to the chief dignities of the priesthood by degrees, and some of them always attended the armies to encourage the men and perform their rites. Those who trained the youth to war punished their scholars by throwing burning coals on their heads, pricking them with sticks of pine sharpened at one end, or by burning off their hair. Their king rewarded the soldiers according to the numbers of prisoners they took, with military habits of several colors, or post in the army till they came to the highest. The chief priests were also men of arms, and capable of all military performance. Their capital punishments were strangling or stoning to death. If a cacique or petty prince rebelled, all his subjects shared in his punishments, except they found some method to appease the king. They punished drunkenness in young men by death, but allowed it in old men and old women of 70. Highwaymen and adulterers they stoned to death. They had assemblies for public affairs, wherein the great master of the emperor or king's household exhorted the youth to avoid idleness, gaming, drunkenness, and other vices. This is the sum of what that hieroglyphical history says of the ancient Mexicans. As to the present natives, most of them are subject to the Spaniard, but in some of the mountains and northern parts they are not reduced, so that they frequently attack the Spaniard when they meet with a favorable opportunity. In that called New Mexico, some of the natives are very barbarous, much given to arms. The men wear nothing but skins, and the women scarce any other covering than their hairs. They live for the most part on raw flesh, and go together in troops, changing their habitation as the season requires, or for the convenience of pasturage. Their oxen and cows are large, with small horns, their hair almost like wool, long before and short behind, with a bunch on their backs, great beards like goats, and their forelegs short. They are of an ugly aspect, but very strong. They are the principal riches of the natives. Their flesh serves them for diet, their skins for clothes, and coverings to their huts. They make thread of their hair, bowstrings of their nerves, utensils of their bones, trumpets of their horns, keep their drinks in their bladders, use their dung for firing, because they are scarce of wood. They have sheep as large as our asses, and dogs so strong that they make them carry their baggage. This country is inhabited by people of different languages and manners. Some of them live in cities, of which it is said there are several that contains from 30 to 50,000 inhabitants. Others wander about in herds like the Arabs or Tartars. But in short, this country is so little known, and the travelers differ so much in their accounts of it, that there is not much to be depended upon. I think it proper here to say something of the peopling of it. There are many opinions about the peopling of America, but the most reasonable to me is that it is peopled from the Tartary by way of the North Pole, where they suppose it to join with some parts of Asia. This I think very probable, because the Spaniard, who came yearly hither from Manila or Luconia, one of the Philippine islands in the East Indies, are forced to keep in high latitude for the benefit of westerly winds, and have often sounded, finding ground in latitude 42 north in several places of the ocean betwixt the East Indies and America, which makes me conclude that there must be more lands, though none of them, as I have heard of, ever saw any continent till they fall in with California, in about 38 or 39 north latitude. I have often admired that no considerable discoveries have yet been made in south latitude from America to the East Indies. I never heard the South Ocean has been run over by above 3 or 4 navigators who varied little in their runs from their course and by consequence could not discover much. I give this hint to encourage our South Sea Company or others to go upon some discovery that way, wherefore ought we know they may find a better country than any yet discovered. There being a vast surface to the sea from the equinox to South Pole, of at least 2,000 leagues in longitude, that has hitherto been little regarded, though it be agreeable to reason that there must be a body of land about the South Pole to counterpoise those vast countries around the North Pole. This I suppose to be the reason why our ancient geographers mentioned a terra australis incognita, though very little of it has been seen by anybody. The land near the North Pole in the South Sea, from California to Japan, is wholly unknown, although the old maps describe the Straits of Anian and a large continent. It is but imaginary, for the Dutch themselves that now trade to Japan say they do not yet know whether it be an island or joins to the continent. Gemelli, having been in this country in 1697, who is the latest traveller that has published anything about it, and his accounts being in the main confirmed to me by our Spanish prisoners, I shall give a brief hint of what he says, especially of what he relates to the trade and provisions. Their best product is gold and silver, pearl, emeralds, and other precious stones. He saw the silver mines of Pachma, 11 leagues from the city of Mexico. One of them, he says, is 225 English yards deep, the other 195. He adds that in space of 6 leagues there are about 1,000 mines, some laid aside, others still in use. There are many thousands of people employed to dig them. From some, the metal and water is brought up by engines. From others, the metal is brought up on men's back to the great danger of their lives, besides numbers that are lost by falling in of the earth and pestilential damps. They go down to them by notched poles, which being wet and slippery, the poor Indian slaves many times fall and break their necks. Our author says he was in danger of doing the like when he went to see them. He adds, the workmen informed him that from one of the veins where near 1,000 men worked per diem, they had in 10 years dug 40 millions of silver, that 2 millions had been laid out in timber work to support it, and that it became so dangerous as the owner stopped it up. I refer to him for the manner of separating the metal from the ore. Every discoverer of a mine must pay the fifth of the product to the king, who allows him only 60 Spanish yards round from the mouth, or all on one side if he pleases. Gemelli says there's 2 millions of marks of 8 ounces each entered at Mexico in a year from those mines, beside what is stored, and 700,000 marks of it are coined annually into pieces of 8th year, for which the king has a real per mark. There being gold mixed with the silver, they make use of aqua fortis to separate them. The officers of the mints have very profitable places, but I can't insist upon their salaries. It is needless to be particular in describing the birds and beasts of this country. They having been so often done by others, I shall only say they have enough for provisions and many of both sorts unknown to us. 'Tis the like as to their fruits and plants, which serve them for food and physic, but I have not room to be particular. Mexico is the capital city of this vast rich country, and lies in north latitude 19.40, in the middle of a valley, which is 14 Spanish leagues long and 7 broad, encompassed by a ridge of mountains. The city is surrounded by a lake, and is square with long and wide and well-paved streets, cross one another. It is 2 leagues round and the diameter half a league. There are 5 causeys and banks through the lake into the city, which vies with the best in Italy for noble structures and beautiful women who prefer Europeans to their own countrymen. This occasions irreconcilable prejudices between them, so that an European can scarce pass the street without being insulted. The inhabitants are about 100,000, the major part blacks and mulattoes, because of the vast numbers of slaves carried thither. Europeans seldom marry there because finding no way to get real estates, they generally become clergymen, which takes up most of those that come from old Spain. There are 22 nunneries, 29 friaries of several orders within the city, and all richer than they ought to be, says Gemelli. The cathedral is exceedingly rich, maintains 10 canons, 5 dignified priests, 6 demi-canons, 6 half demi-canons, 1 chief sacristan, 5 curates, 12 royal chaplains, and 8 others chosen by the chapter, besides many others named by the king. The revenue of the cathedral is 300,000 pieces of 8 per annum. The climate here is uncertain, as through all the country, being for most part both cold and hot at the same time, with cold in the shade and hot in the sun, but is never excessive either way. Yet the inhabitants complain of the cold in the mornings, and of the heat from March till July. From thence to September the rains cool the air, and from that time till March the rains are but small. The Indians reckon those nights cold, but the Europeans like the climate well enough. Their water is very cool. The neighboring country produces 3 harvests per annum, one in June, the second in October, and the third uncertain, as the weather proves. Maize or Indian corn is their chief grain, the earliest being sowed in March, the latest in May. It yields a wonderful increase, and other provisions being plentiful, one may live well here for half a piece of 8 per day. And all the year round, there's fruits and flowers in the market. There's no brass money here, and the least piece of silver is 3 pence, so that they buy herbs and small fruits with coconuts, 60 or 70 of which, as time goes, are valued at 6. I cannot insist on the particular description of the churches and monasteries. The Archbishop has 11 suffragans under him, whose revenues in all amount to 5,160,000 pieces of 8. The cathedral founded by Fernando Cortez, who conquered this country, was not finished in 1697. It is carried on at the king's charge. They have admirable conveyances to let the water run out of the lake by canals, to prevent its overflowing the city, as sometimes it has done. The expense of these canals is so prodigious that it seems incredible. The curious may find it in Gemelli, as also an account of the royal palace and other structures. I say nothing of the fabulous accounts which the natives give of the foundation of this city. The present habit generally worn by the natives of this country is a short doublet and wide breeches, a cloak of several colors on their shoulders, which they cross under the right arm, and tie on the left shoulder by the 2 ends in a great knot. Some wear sandals, the rest go barefooted and bare-legged, and all wear their hair long, which they will by no means part with. The women wear a fine cotton cloth, and under it a thing like a sack. They wear another upon their backs, with which they cover their heads when abroad or in church. The natives adorn their narrow coats with the figures of beasts, birds, and feathers. Both sexes are of dark color, but endeavor to make themselves fair with pounded herbs. They daub their heads with thin clay to refresh them and make their hair black. The mestizo, mulatto, and black women are most in number, but not being allowed to wear veils or Spanish habits, and despising the Indian garb, they wear a thing like a petticoat across their shoulders or on their heads, which makes them look like so many devils. The blacks and mulattoes are very insolent, and so much increased, that if it weren't prevented, they may at one time or another endanger the country. The Indians of most parts of Mexico are nothing so industrious as formerly, and the Spaniards say they are cowardly, cruel, thieves, cheats, and so beastly that they use women in common, without regard to the nearest relations, lie on the bare ground, and are nasty in their way of living, which perhaps may proceed from the slavery they are kept under, being worse treated than those in the mines. He adds that there is scarce one fair-dealing man to be found among 100 mulattoes. Acapulco lies in latitude 17, bathing some few minutes. He said it is rather like a poor village of fishermen than fit to be the cheap marts of South Sea and port for China. The houses are mean, built of wood, mud, and straw. It is covered by high mountains on the east side, and very subject to distempers from November till the end of May, during which time they have no rain or very little. It is hot here in January, as in our dog days. They are much pestered with gnats and earthquakes. He observed that it never rains in New Spain in the morning. This town is dirty and ill furnished with provisions, so that a man can scarce live for a piece of 8 per day. Most of the inhabitants are blacks and mulattoes, for the Spanish merchants are gone as soon as their business is over at the fair, for goods brought hither from China and Peru. It has nothing good but the harbor, which is surrounded with high mountains, and the ships are moored to trees that grow on the shore. It has 2 mouths, the small one at northwest, and the great at southeast. The mouth is defended by 42 brass cannon. The Castellans, who is chief magistrate during the fair, has 20,000 pieces of 8 from the duties paid in the harbor, and the controller and other officers as much. The curate has 14,000 per annum, though the king allows him but 180. But he exacts terribly on baptism and burials, so that he will scarce bury a rich merchant under 1,000. The trade of this place being for many millions, everyone in his profession gets a great deal in a short time, for a black will scarce work for less than a piece of 8 per diem. All the dependence of inhabitants is on the port, which also maintains the hospital, monasteries, and missionaries. During the fair, this town resembles a populous city because of the great concourse of merchants from Peru and Mexico. Then the miserable huts, in which there was nothing before but a few nasty mulattoes, are filled with gay Spaniard and rich merchant, and the very porters do generally earn 3 pieces of 8 per diem, by loading and unloading of the goods, and so on. But when this trade is over, the porters make a sort of funeral, carry one of their number about upon a bier, and pretend to bewail his death, because their harvest for gain is then at an end till the next year. I shall not here say anything further of the seaports of Mexico, because the reader will find them in the appendix, which gives a full account of all the noted harbors in the South Sea, but shall add that the trade of Mexico on this coast is very little compared with that of Peru, because those of the former have their goods brought to their chief ports in the North Sea directly from Europe, so that except when the 2 ships come yearly from Manila to Acapulco, they have little commerce in this sea. I must here observe that the ships which come from Manila used to be much richer than our price, for she waited a long time for the Chinese junk to bring silk, which not arriving, she came away with the cargo mixed with abundance of coarse goods. The prisoners told me that the Manila ship did often return from Acapulco with $10 millions, and that the officers never cleared less than from $20,000 to $30,000 each in a voyage, and the captain, whom they call general, seldom got less than 150 or 200,000 pieces of 8. So that it would have been an extraordinary prize could we have met with them at the time. I think it proper to observe here, because it belongs to the subject, that when we arrived at the Texel in Holland, there were 2 Spanish ships there, bound for Cadiz, and on board one of them a sailor, who told us he was aboard a large Spanish ship from Manila, when she arrived at Acapulco, very much disabled by the engagement she had with us off of California, that it was the gunner who made them engage us so resolutely at first, and forced them to continue the fight by keeping in the powder room himself, and having taken the sacrament to blow up the ship in case we had boarded and overpowered her. I was the more apt to believe this man had seen the ship, and this story might be true because he related almost every passage of the fight as I given it before in my journal. I shall also take notice here that Captain Stradling, who was taken prisoner in America when his ship stranded and came off prisoner in a French ship, some months after we left the South Sea, informed me that the corregidors of Guayaquil sent an express to Lima upon the first notice of our being in those parts, that they then apprehended us to be part of a squadron of men of war, and therefore lay still until they had certain advice of our strength, and in about 3 weeks after we took the town, they fitted out 3 Spanish men of war, which was all their South Sea strength against us. The biggest carried not above 32 guns, but they were joined by 2 French ships, one of them 50 and the other of 36 guns, and all well manned. They stopped at Paita till Mr. Hatley and his 4 men, who lost company with us at the Galapagos Islands, being in want of provisions and having had no water for 14 days, stood in for the main, and landed near Cape Passau, almost under the equinox among the barbarous sort of people, who are a mixed breed of Negroes and Indians. They voluntarily surrendered themselves, being in a starving condition, yet those brutish people, instead of giving them food, tied their hands and whipped them and hanged them up, so that they must unavoidably have lost their lives had not a padre who lived in the neighborhood came time enough by good providence to cut them down and save them. There are several letters from Mr. Hatley since, which signify that he is a prisoner at Lima. Captain Stradling likewise told me that the French ship which brought him to Europe was the very ship that we chased in sight of Falkland Island before we passed Cape Horn. She had before attempted to sail around the Cape Horn to South Sea, but it being the wrong season, she met with a bad weather and was forced to bear away to recruit at the river of La Plata, and there wait for more proper season to go round Tierra del Fuego into South Sea. When we chased her, she had not above 100 healthful men on board, so that had we been able to come up with her, she must certainly have been our prize. Captain Stradling told me they ran their ship on an island, and afterwards surrendered the prisoners to the Spaniards to save their lives, she being ready to sink, so that the report I formerly mentioned that part of their crew was drowned in the ship proves a mistake. In Mexico, the prisoners who are employed in cutting logwood had no way to escape the cruelty of the Spaniard but to turn papist and be baptized after their manner. Then they have the liberty to choose a godfather who is generally a man of note, and they serve him as a liveryman, and so on. One boy who fled to us at Guayaquil was baptized thus by an abbot in the Cathedral of Mexico, had salt put in his mouth, and oil poured upon his head, and small parcels of cotton, which rubbed it off, were distributed as precious relics among the penitents, because taken off the head of a converted heretic, as they call them. The native Spaniards enjoy all the posts in the church and monasteries, and admit no Indians, nor any mixed breed to those preferment, which they think a necessary piece of policy, that they may be the better keep the country in subjection to Spain. Some of these prisoners who are forced to be pretended converts do now and then make their escape, though it be dangerous to attempt it, for if taken they are generally confined to the workhouses for life. There are several Englishmen who are prisoners in this country, but by compliance have obtained their liberty, with the loss of their religion in exchange for riches, particularly one Thomas Bull, who was born in Dover and taken in Campeche. He is a clockmaker, has been 18 years there, is about 45 years old, lives in the province of Tabasco, and grown very rich. One Captain James Thompson, born in the Isle of Wight, has been there about 20 years, is about 50 years old, grown rich, and commanded the mulattoes who took Captain Peck at the beginning of the war. The person who told me this was comb-maker, and endeavored to escape from La Vera Cruz, but was taken and sent prisoner to Mexico, where he came off to Peru after he had his liberty by pretending he went to buy ivory to make combs. He gave me a long account of his ramble amongst the Indians, and says he was at the mouth of river Mississippi, which falls into the Gulf of Mexico, but could not pass it. He adds that the Indians on the Bay of Pilachi have murdered several of the padres out of aversion to the Spaniard, but show a great inclination to trade with the English. There are other Englishmen who now live near the Bay of Campeche, as I was informed. One of them is Thomas Faulkner, who was born at the Hen and Chickens in Pall Mall, where his friend kept an alehouse. He is married to an Indian woman. Such of them as won't comply to turn Papists are kept in miserable slavery, either in the mines or workhouses at Mexico, which city says is about as large as Bristol. Those that are put in workhouses are chained and employed in carding woods, rasping log woods, and so on. They have more manufactures of woolen and linen in Mexico than in Peru. Abundance of raw silk is brought from China, and over late years worked up into rich brocades equal to any made in Europe. The mulattoes and Indians on light occasions are put into the workhouses and kept there till they pay their debts or tributes, but no Spaniard except for the worst of the crimes. There are many Englishmen who were taken cutting logwood in the Bay of Campeche. In several of these workhouses kept hard labor, and will end their days in slavery, unless their liberty be demanded by Your Majesty at the general peace. There is abundance of sheep in this country, which yield excellent wool, of which I am informed the English prisoners have taught them to make clothes worth about 15 shillings a yard in England, which there yields 8 pieces of 8. They have also taught them to make baize and other coarse woolen. At Chopa in Mexico, about latitude 12 north, there is a great river which sinks into the earth at once, runs on the mountains, and rises bigger about 15 leagues from the place where it sunk. It is twice as large as the Thames. This river afterwards joins that of Tabasco and falls into the North Sea, as most of the great rivers of this vast continent do. He told me about this place. There are high mountains with plains on the top, where the air is very temperate, and all our European fruits grow, whereas at the bottom of these mountains they have none but the fruits of hot climate, though it is not above 5 leagues asunder. There are also woods of pines and so on those mountains, among which there are flocks of harmonious birds, which sing together in an agreeable concert that resembles a fine organ, so that strangers are amazed to hear such music strike up of a sudden in the woods. There is also a strange creature in those woods, called by the Spaniard an once, much of the form and size of wolf dog, but it has talons, and head is more like that of tiger. It kills man and beast, which makes traveling through the woods dangerous. It is said to eat nothing but the heart of its prey. I had many more relations from this man, who had been 7 years a prisoner in this country, but they being too tedious, I shall add nothing more concerning Mexico, but that the worm is larger, and its bottom of the ship more on its sea coasts, than any other place where we were. All the coast from Guayaquil in Peru to the northward, as far as latitude 20 in Mexico, it is reckoned unhealthful, but the contrary from Guayaquil to southward. End of section 16.
Section 17 of A Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woods Rogers. Peru described. I shall not trouble the reader with the history of its conquest by the Spaniards, nor the fabulous stories of its Incas or princes. The curious may find them in the Spanish writers, and for the natives they are much the same as those I have described in other parts. Peru, properly so called, is about 1,000 leagues long, but the breadth varies from 100 to 300 leagues. The best known part of it lies on the South Sea and is divided into the three audiences: Quito in the north, Lima in the middle, and La Plata in the south. The air of Quito is temperate enough, though under the line. The soil is fruitful, abounds with cattle and corn, and they have mines of gold, silver, quicksilver, and copper. They have also emeralds and medical drugs. The audience of Lima is most noted because of its capital of the same name, being the residence of the Viceroy of Peru. This country abounds with mines of gold, silver, quicksilver, vermilion, and salt. The audience of La Plata I have already described in my account of that river. I shall only add that though the silver mines of Potosi be much decayed, yet some say the King of Spain has annually about 2 millions of crowns per annum for his wealth, and that those of La Plata and Porco in the same province, which were, upon discovery of the mines of Potosi, less used, may probably be opened again to advantage. Now, goods are sold so cheap by the continual supplies from France that the Indians, who were employed in the manufactures, must again work at the mines, their own coarse goods being brought thither cheaper than they can make them. The Spanish writers in general say that for 500 leagues in length, from Tumbes to Chile, it never thunders, lightens nor rains, which agrees with the informations that I had from our prisoners, viz. That from Cape Blanco in south latitude 4 to Coquimbo, latitude 30, it never rains, but the water of this is supplied by great dews, so that they have as good corn and fruit, particularly wheat, about Truxillo, as any in Europe. In the valleys near the sea, the climate is hot, but tempered with breezes from the ocean and mountains. In the hilly part, far into the country, 'tis winter and very rainy, when 'tis summer in the plains, though in the same latitude. The product, beasts and birds, being much the same with other parts of the South Sea coast, I shall not insist upon them. They have their cordage, cotton, clothes, pitch, and tar from Chile and Riolito in Mexico, and though the country abounds with provision, 'tis always dear near the mines, because there husbandry is neglected. The cordage they use is made of coarse silk grass, which is very tough, draws small when strained, but grows twice as big when slaked. Captain Stradling told me he traveled the great road from Quito towards Cusco in his way to Lima, which has piles of stone on each side for some hundreds of miles. When he and his men were brought prisoners to Lima, the Spaniards put them in close dungeon, used them barbarously, and threatened to send them to the mines because he attempted his escape and sailed in canoe from Lima towards Panama, near 400 leagues, intending to cross the isthmus and to get to Jamaica by some of our trading sloops, but was taken and brought back to Lima. Before he came hence, he saw several of the Spaniards who had been our prisoners, and said that all owned we had treated them very severely, which has in part taken off the bad impression they had conceived of the English in those parts. For, not being used to war, they account all alike that come to cruise, because of the unheard of cruelties and debaucheries which were committed about 24 years ago by the buccaneers in those parts, which their priests did improve to give them an ill idea of all those they think fit to call heretics, not considering that most of those disorders were committed by French buccaneers of their own religion. Having said so much of Peru in several parts of my journal, I need not enlarge upon it here. The Spaniards extend it from Panama to Coquimbo, which is about 800 leagues, but the breadth varies. The gold mines are most of them in the north parts, betwixt Panama and Equinox. Before the French traded hither round Cape Horn, there was a considerable commerce from Panama to all the ports of the South Sea, as I noted before. But now they have supplied the country so much with European goods, and so cheap that this trade is in manner sunk, so that from henceforward there will be little sent overland from Panama to the North Sea, but the king's revenue. The Spaniards have a great many ships and small vessels belonging to the several ports of Peru, which are chiefly employed in carrying timber, salt fish, wine, brandy, oil, and other commodities, from one part of the coast to another, without which they could not well subsist. For this country is laid to be more populous and better inhabited than Mexico. They make woolen cloths, here of several sorts. I have seen some made at Quito worth about 8 soles per yard, that's sold here for $5. The Indians do likewise make a coarse sort of cotton cloth, but since the French furnish them better and cheaper, those manufactures will come to nothing, and the people must betake themselves to digging of mines or what other employment they can get. The Spanish settlements in this country, as well as in Mexico and Chile, are not so full of Indians as formerly, for many of them are gone to remote parts and live in colonies by themselves, to avoid the slavery and taxes imposed on them by the Spaniards. For they were obliged to pay from $8 to $18 per annum per head to the king, which, had it been duly collected and faithfully paid, would have amounted to the greatest poll tax in the world. But 'tis now lessened by the removal of so many natives as above mentioned, and the impoverishment of the rest, who are sensible enough of their oppression, but are so dispirited that they can do nothing to assert their liberty. And they are besides kept under by the artifices of the priests. The Spaniards here are very profuse in their clothing and equipage, and affect to wear the most costly things that can be purchased, so that those who trade hither with such commodities as they want may be sure to have the greatest share of their wealth. Chile described. I come next to the kingdom of Chile, which lies nearest to those who shall think fit to attempt a trade from England into the South Sea. Father Ovalle, a native of this country, and procurator for it at Rome, agrees with our maps that it lies farthest south of any part of America, on that called the South or Pacific Sea. He bounds it with Peru on the north, the Straits of Magellan on the south, Paraguay, Tucumán, and Patagonia on the east, and the South Sea on the west. He begins it at south latitude 25 and extends it to latitude 59, which is near 500 leagues. The breadth of it varies. In the broadest place from east to west, he makes about 150 leagues, though Chile, properly so called, is not above 20 or 30 leagues broad from the chain of mountains named Cordillera to the South Sea. But when the King of Spain divided America into particular governments, he added to Chile the vast plains of Cuyo, which are of an equal length and twice as broad as Chile itself. The country in general Ovalle places in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th climates. The longest day in the 3rd is 13 hours, and in the 5th above 14. The first European who took possession of it was Don Diego d'Almagro, a Spaniard in 1535. He is said to march hither from Peru by order of the King of Spain with a body of Spanish troops and 15,000 Indians and blacks, commanded by some Indian princes who had submitted to the Spaniards. I shall not trouble the reader with the particular history of the Spanish conquests till they reduced this country, which they may find at large in Ovalle, Herrera, and others, but shall only say in general that it was not totally in subjection to the Spaniards till the year 1640, when the inhabitants submitted to the crown of Spain on condition that they should not be given in property as slaves. The Spaniards, who sufficiently experienced the valor of these people, treat them with more civility than they do the rest of the Americans, on purpose to keep them in obedience, and for the most part they have submitted to the Church of Rome. The Sansons say that Chile, in the language of the country, signifies cold, which is so excessive in the mountains called Sierra Nevada, a part of the Cordillera, that it freezes men and cattle to death and keeps their corpses from putrefaction, so that Almagro lost a great many of his men and horses as he passed those mountains. But the valleys toward the sea are very healthful, the climate temperate, and the soil excellent and fruitful, though with some difference according as it lies nearer or further from the equator, but the coasts are subject to strong gales of wind. The country is divided into 3 quarters, and those 3 into 13 jurisdictions. The quarter of Chile proper extends from the river Copiapo to that of Maule, and is harder than Spain. The second quarter, called Imperial, reaches from the river Maule to that of Gallegos, and much resembles the climate of Spain. The proximity of the mountains on one side and of the sea on the other makes it colder than otherwise it would be, but it has warmth enough to make it one of the best countries in America. The valley of Copiapo is so fruitful that it frequently yields 300 for one single measure. Those of Cuaco and Coquimbo fall very little short of it, and that of Chile proper is so excellent that it gives name to the whole country by way of eminence. I come now to give a brief view of what Ovalle, a native, says to it in general. He tells us that in Chile, properly so called, viz. The country betwixt the mountains and the sea, the soil and climate exceed those of any part of Europe in goodness, by the confession of the Europeans themselves. He says it's like the best part of Europe in everything, except the opposition of the seasons, it being spring and summer in the one, when it's autumn and winter in the other. But in the valleys, the heat and cold are not so excessive as in Europe, especially from latitude 36 or thereabouts to latitude 45, so that neither the heat of the day nor the cold of the night can be complained of, from whence it's that the inhabitants make no difference between the summer and winter in their bedding and clothes. He adds that they are not troubled here with lightning and seldom hear thunder, except at a great distance. They have no storms of hail in the spring, and seldom above 2 or 3 rainy days together in the winter, after which the sky is serene without the least cloud. The north winds bring the clouds and rain, and the south winds speedily make all clear. They have no poisonous or ravenous creatures, except a small sort of lions, which sometimes prey on their flocks, but always fly from man. Nor are these lions numerous, there being only a few of them in the woods and deserts. He observes as a peculiar property of the air of Chile that no bugs will live in it, though they swarm in Cuyo on the other side of the mountains. From the whole, he infers that there is no country in America so agreeable to European constitutions as Chile, and air and provisions are so like their own, but rather better. The spring begins about the middle of our August, and lasts till the middle of November. Then the summer halts to the middle of February, the autumn continues to the middle of May, and the winter from thence to the middle of August. During this season, the trees are deprived of their leaves, and the ground is covered with white frosts, which are dissolved about 2 hours after the sun rises. The snow falls seldom in the valleys, but in great quantity in the mountains, from whence it's melted in the summer, and fructifies the valleys and plains with rivulets. In the spring, the fields are adorned with beautiful flowers of all colors and sorts, and of an admirable scent, from whence there distil a fine liquid called angel's water, which makes a noble perfume. The choicest flowers and plants that we cultivate grow wild there. They have groves of mustard trees higher than a man on horseback, and the birds build their nests in them. They have many physical plants and herbs, with which their Indian physicians perform wonderful cures, when the patients are despaired of by our European doctors. But they are very shy of communicating those secrets. Fruits and seeds brought hither from Europe thrive very well, but those of Mexico and Peru don't. They have all our sorts of fruit in such abundance that everyone may take what they please, so that none is sold except a sort of extraordinary large strawberries which they cultivate. They have oats, wheat, and maize in such plenty that they are seldom troubled with want of grain. Their pastures are so rich, and their cattle of all sorts so numerous, that they don't value the flesh, but salt the tongues and lions, and send them to Peru with the hides and tallow, which is a great branch of their trade. They have store of noble and generous wines, both white and red, Their vines are larger and their clusters of grapes much bigger than any in Europe. They have also plenty of olives, groves of cacao trees of several leagues long, almond trees, and such store of silk grass, which they use instead of hemp, that they furnish all the coasts of the South Sea with cordage for their ships. They have also great quantities of anise and cumin seed, salt, flax, wool, leather, timber, pitch, amber, and so on, so that according to Ovalle, merchants may trade from hence to other parts in the South Sea, and especially to Lima, from 100 to 300% profit, of which I have also been informed by our prisoners. Though they have abundance of mulberry trees, they breed no silkworms, so that the ladies who are extravagant in their apparel impoverish the country by purchasing the rich silks, though they might easily have enough of their own. They have plenty of bees, yet have their wax from Europe, for want of industry to improve their own, and they have pepper and other spice from the East Indies, though they have a kind of spice of their own, which might very well supply them. He adds that the herbage, fishing, hunting, wood for fuel and timber, and salt mines are here in common, so that everyone may take what they please. They make little use of their mines of lead and quicksilver, for Peru has enough of the latter to purify their silver. Ovalle says the gold mines are so many that from the confines of Peru to the Straits of Magellan, there is no part of the country without them. But they are not so much followed as in Peru, and they don't so much apply themselves to the silver mines, because those of gold are wrought with less charge. Their silver is dug from hard rocks, ground to powder in their mills, and then refined with quicksilver, which is laborious as well as expensive, whereas they have no other trouble with the gold than to wash the earth from it. Yet sometimes they follow the veins of gold through rocks, when they have hopes that they will grow larger, as they frequently do, and one of these veins is often enough to enrich the discoverers. Gold is not dug here in such plenty, since the war betwixt the Spaniards and Araucanos. But the natives wait for the winter rains, which wash it down from the mountains into rivers, ponds, etc. When the women go into the water, feel out the grains with their toes, and make up as much as supplies their present necessaries, as our author says, but to me this appears a very odd way to get gold. He tells us that he sent one of those grains to Seville, where being touched it was found to be 23 carats fine, without any manner of purification. Most of the bells and great guns used in Peru are made of the copper of this country. He comes next to give an account of the chain of mountains named Cordillera, from his own observation and what he has read in authors. He says they run from north to south, from the province of Quito to the Straits of Magellan, which is above 1,000 leagues, and accounts them the highest mountains in the world. They are generally 40 leagues broad and intermixed with abundance of habitable valleys. These mountains form two ridges. The lowmost is covered with woods and groves, but the higher barren, because of the excessive cold and snow on them. The most remarkable animals in these mountains are 1. That species of hawks which have their navels on their backs, called peccary. These go in great herds with each their leader until he be killed. 'Tis not safe for hunters to attack them, but when he falls, they immediately disperse. 2. Wild goats, whose hair is as soft as silk and much used for fine hats. 3. Their sheep, called guanacos, shaped like camels, but of a far less size, with wool as fine that's preferred to silk for softness and color. He adds that the ancient Incas or princes cut 2 roads through those mountains, and if we may believe Herrera, one of them was paved for 900 leagues from Cusco to Chile. 'Twas 25 foot broad, and at every 4 leagues there was a noble structure, and at each half league couriers to relieve one another, and carrying messages from the state. He says there are still a sort of inns on this road where travelers find all necessaries, but the path into the mountains are so narrow that a single mule can scarce pass them. The ascent begins at the very shore of the sea, but that which is properly called the mountains requires 3 or 4 days' journey to the top of them, where the air is so very piercing and cold that he found difficulty to breathe when he passed them, so that he and his fellow travelers were obliged to breathe quicker and stronger than ordinary, and to apply their handkerchiefs to their mouth to break the extreme coldness of the air. Herrera says that those who pass them from Peru are troubled with aching and vomitings. Ovalle adds that there are meteors upon those mountains, sometimes so high in the air that they resemble stars, and at other times so low that they frighten the mules and buzz about their ears and feet. He says on the top of those mountains they can't see the country below for clouds, though the sky over their heads is clear and bright, and the sun shines with admirable beauty. When he passed the highest part of that which is properly called the Cordillera, he found no snow, though in the beginning of winter, whereas in the lower parts 'twas so deep that the mules would scarce travel. He supposes in reason why there was no snow on the top is that it reached above the middle region of the air. There are 16 volcanoes in this chain of mountains, which sometimes break out with dreadful effects, cleave the rocks, and issue great quantities of fire, with a noise resembling thunder. I refer to our author for the particular names and places of those volcanoes. He doubts not but there are many rich mines among those mountains, though the natives industriously conceal them and make it death to discover them, which has defeated several attempts of that nature by the Spaniards. The natives have no occasion for those mines themselves, because they have plenty of provisions, which is all they desire, and they are afraid that such discoveries will occasion the Spaniards to dispossess them, or to make them work in the mines as slaves. He concludes this head with an account that very rich mines were discovered at the foot of those mountains on the side of Cuillo. Those mountains of the Cordillera are passable only in summer, or in the beginning of the winter. There are frightful precipices and deep rivers at the sides of the narrow passes, which frequently occasions the loss of mules and travelers. the streams run with such violence and so far below the roads that to look at them turns one's head. The ascent and descents are so steep that they are difficult to pass on foot, but the irksomeness of the way is alleviated by the beautiful cascades which the water naturally forms as it falls from the rocks and mountains. And in some of the valleys, the water springs up to a great height, like fountains made by art, amongst odoriferous plants and flowers, which make an agreeable prospect. All these streams and springs are so very cool that a man can't drink above 2 or 3 sips at once, nor hold his hand in them above a minute. In some places there are hot springs good against many distempers, and leave a green tincture in the channels through which they run. One of those rivers, called Mendoca, has a natural bridge of rock over it, from the fault of which there hang several pieces of stone resembling salt, which congeal like icicles as the water drops from the rock, and are formed into several shapes and colors. This bridge is broad enough for 3 or 4 carts to pass abreast. There is another bridge near this, called the Incas, laid over by art betwixt 2 rocks, as some say, but our author thinks it's the work of nature. It's so very high from the river that he could not hear the stream, which runs with great rapidity, and though it be a large river, it appeared like a brook when he looked down from the bridge, which he could not do without being struck with horror. He comes next to describe the particular rivers which run from these mountains, but I shall only mention the chief of them, and though most of them don't run above 30 leagues, yet some of them, towards the mouth, are navigable by ships of the greatest burden. The first is that which rises in the confines of Peru, about south latitude 25. 'Tis called the River of Salt, because 'tis so salt that it can't be drank and petrifies what's thrown into it. 2. Copiapo, which rises in latitude 26, runs 20 leagues from east to west and forms a bay and harbor at its entrance into the sea. 3. Guaco rises in latitude 28 and forms likewise a bay and harbor. 4. The river of Cocumbo, which rises in latitude 30, forms a noble bay and a port, with beautiful myrtles and other trees on the bank that make a noble and pleasant grove. 5. Aconcagua, a large deep river that rises about latitude 33, runs through several fruitful valleys. 6. Maipo rises about latitude 33 and half. It's so rapid that it admits no bridge but one made of cables. It enters the sea with so much force that its waters form a circle and are distinguished a great way. It's brackish, noted for excellent trouts, and the sheep which feed on its banks afford mutton of a curious relish. There are several other rivers which fall into it. The first is that of Santiago, alias Mapocho. 'Tis divided into several streams to water the district of Santiago, which sometimes it overflows. Not far from the city, it sinks underground and rises again in a grove, about 2 or 3 leagues distant. 2. The river Pongui. Its water is extraordinarily clear and sweet, and flowing into veins of metal very much helps digestion. It runs for several leagues underground, fructifies the valley which lies over it, and produces excellent corn and melons. The banks of this river are adorned with beautiful trees. 3. The rivers Ticolina and Lampa, which unite together within 10 or 12 leagues of their rise, and form the noted lake of Cudagues. It's so deep that great vessels may sail in it, is about 2 leagues long, and its banks covered with trees that are verdant all the year. It abounds with excellent trouts and smelts, which are great convenience to the city of Santiago. 7. Rapel is nothing inferior to Maypo, enters the sea about latitude 34.5, and receives several other rapid streams. The adjacent country has excellent pastures for fattening of cattle. 8. Delora rises in latitude 34.75 and is exactly like the former. 9. Mol, a great river, which rises in latitude 35 and bounds the jurisdiction of Santiago. The natives call all the country betwixt those rivers Promocus, i.e. a place of dancing and delight, which our author says is very just, for he never saw a more pleasant country, nor one better furnished with provisions of all sorts. The Spaniards have many noble farms in these parts. Near the mouth of this river, there is a dock for building of ships and a ferry belonging to the king for the convenience of passengers. 10. Itata. 'Tis 3 times as large and deep as the Mole, and enters the sea about latitude 36. In most places they pass it on rafts, and in some it's fordable. 11. Andaline, a river which runs slow and enters the spacious and pleasant Bay of Conception at latitude 36.75. There is another small river which runs through the middle of the city of Conception, a little above which it falls from a high rock and gives the inhabitants an opportunity to form all sorts of waterworks from it, among pleasant groves of laurels, myrtles, and other odoriferous plants. 12. Biobio, a famous river, which enters the sea in latitude 37, 'tis the largest in Chile, and is from 2 to 3 miles broad at its mouth. Our author says its waters run through veins of gold and fields of sarsaparilla, which make them very wholesome, and good against several distempers. This river is the boundary betwixt the Indians who are friends to the Spaniards and those who are their enemies, and make frequent incursions upon them. This obliges the Spaniards to keep many garrisons in those parts, but the natives trust to their mountains. This river swells so much in the winter that it becomes unpassable and occasions a cessation of arms on both sides. These people, says Ovalle, have given the Spaniards more trouble than all the other natives of America, so that they are forced to maintain 12 forts, well provided with men and cannon, besides the city of Conception and Chilam, to overawe the natives. 13. Imperial, a pleasant river which falls into the sea, about latitude 39, after having received many other rivers, and among them 2 which run into the famous lake of Buran, where the Indians have an impregnable fortress. 14. Talton, about 30 miles from the river Imperial, is deep enough for great ships, where it enters the sea. 15. About 8 leagues farther, the river Quanail enters the sea and is capable of small barks. 16. Valdivia, so called from Pedro de Valdivia, one of the conquerors and governors of Chile, who built a port and city near the mouth of it, where great ships may come up about 3 leagues from the sea. This river opens to the north, and over against the city lies the pleasant island of Constantine with 2 others. The river is navigable on both sides of the island, but deepest on the south side. 17. Chile, which rises from a lake at the foot of the Cordillera, where there are baths good against the leprosy and other distempers. Our author says so little of the rivers on the east side of the Cordillera that we pass them over. Ovalle gives an account of many remarkable fountains, both hot and cold, good against most distempers, but I shall not insist on them. He says they have many sea lakes or bays, which bring great profit to the owners, because their fisheries are more certain than those of the sea, and furnish most part of the Lenten fare to the inhabitants, and in the hot season abundance of salt. He adds that in the valley of Lampa, near Santiago, there is an herb about a foot high, resembling sweet basil. In summer, it's covered with grains of salt, like pearl, which is more savory and has a fine flavor than any other salt. Our author comes next to treat of the fertility of the coast, which he says, among other fish, produces shellfish in great quantities, larger than anywhere else. And 1. Oysters, valuable both for their meat and pearls. 2. Chorus, a fine sort of shellfish, which also bred pearl. 3. Manicus, which have 2 round shells, the inside of which resembles mother of pearl. In short, he says, the sea throws up shellfish in such quantities upon some parts of the coast that ships may be loaded with them, and their shells are of such a variety of colors and shapes that our European visitors might from hence have a curious collection, whereas the Indians only burn them for chalk. There are other sorts of fish on these coasts, some of which they call sea stars, others suns and moons, because they resemble those planets as they are usually painted, which are common elsewhere, but not so large as here. These fish, reduced into powder and drank in wine, are an infallible remedy against drunkenness, and frequently used for that end, because it creates an abhorrence of wine in those who drink it, says our author. He adds that great quantities of amber are found on this coast, particularly the grey sort, which is the best. They have all other sorts of fish, common to us in Europe, besides others peculiar to themselves. He comes next to their birds, and besides those which are common in Europe, there are 1. Flamingos, bigger than turkeys, the feathers of a white and scarlet color, of which the natives make ornaments, and their legs are so long that they walk through lakes and ponds. 2. The child bird, so called because they look like a swaddled child, and with its arms at liberty. They are very good meat. 3. Aeronus, so much valued for the feathers, to make tufts, that formerly, they say, every feather upon their heads cost 2 reals. These birds are rare. There are other called garcolos, whose feathers are generally used by soldiers. 4. Voicas, from whose notes the Indians pretend to foretell death, sickness, or other misfortunes. The feathers on their breasts are of a deep scarlet color, and the rest brown. 5. Pingudas, their body is of the size of an almond, their feet upon flowers, and shine like polished gold, mixed with green. The males have a lively orange color, like fire on their heads, and the tails of those birds are a foot long and 2 inches broad. 6. Condores, which are white as ermine, their skins are extreme soft and warm, and therefore used as gloves. They have abundance of ostriches and a variety of hawks in this country. Avali comes next to treat their beasts. He says they had no cows, horses, sheep, hogs, house cats, nor common dogs of any sort, goats, asses, or rabbits, till they were brought hither by the Spaniards. But now all these are increased to a wonderful degree by the richness of their country and pasture, so that one cow frequently yields 150 pounds weight of tallow. Herrera says that when the Spaniards came first hither, a horse was commonly sold for 1,000 crowns, but now they are so plenty that they send them yearly to Peru. The most remarkable animals, which are not common with us, are 1. Their sheep, mentioned before, shaped like camels, though not so large. The natives used them for ploughing and carriage before they had European cattle. Their upper lips are slit, with which they spit at those who vex them, and wherever their spittle falls, it causes a scab. They governed them by a kind of bridle put into their ears, and they would kneel like camels to take on their burden. 2. Wild goats, which very much resemble those sheep, but are all of a red clear color, so very swift that they outrun horses and are never to be tamed. They feed in great herds and are hunted by dogs, which easily catch the young ones that are excellent meat. The flesh of the old ones, dried and smoked, is reckoned the best of its kind. These creatures, especially the oldest, have bizarre stones in a bag under their belly. Our author says he brought one of those stones to Italy, which weighed 32 ounces and was as perfect an oval as if it had been formed by a turner. He gave the Indian who found it 70 pieces of 8 for it. Their most remarkable trees, besides what are common to Europe, are 1. The cinnamon tree, so called because the bark resembles cinnamon in such plenty that they cover their houses with them. They keep their leaves all the year and resemble the Italian laurel royal. 2. The guac tree grows in the Cordillera, is as hard and heavy as iron. The decoction is good against many diseases. 3. The sandal tree, that's very odoriferous, a preservative against infectious distempers, and therefore used by the priests when they visit the sick. 4. The maguya, whose leaves are admirable against burnings. The fruit is like myrtle berries and of an excellent relish. 5. The quilo, of whose fruit they make a very sweet drink. 7. Ilugan. The Spaniards call it molde. 'Tis of the shape and color of pepper. It grows on a small tree and makes an agreeable liquor, coveted by those of quality. 8. The myrtilla, which grows on the mountains from latitude 37 and upwards. Herrera says its fruit is a common good to the natives, not unlike a grape, and of this they make a wine that exceeds all other liquors. 'Tis of a bright gold color, will bear more water than any other wine, cheers the heart, and never offends the stomach, but increases appetite. The vinegar made of it exceeds all other sorts. Our author adds that their cypress, cedar, and oak trees are extraordinarily good. He comes next to the islands of Chile. The first are those of Juan Fernandez, already described. The second are the islands of Chiloé, which lie about latitude 43 and form an archipelago of 40 islands. He says the nature of the climate is such that it rains almost all year, so that only maize or such other grain can ripen here as need little sun. The chief diet of the inhabitants is the root papas, which is larger here than anywhere else. They have excellent shellfish, very good poultry and hogs, some beeves and sheep. The capital of this country is the city of Castra, which lies in the chief island and is garrisoned by the Spaniards. Here they have great store of honey and wax, and some gold mines on the coast. Their chief manufacture is clothing for the Indians, and they have vast woods of cedar trees of a prodigious size, with the planks of which they drive a great trade to Chile and Peru. 3. The islands of Chinos in latitude 45, but of little use, because of the excessive rains which drown the soil. 4. The Fine Island, which lies almost in the same latitude with Valparaiso and St. Hugo. It has a safe harbor for ships, where they may ride in 20 or 30 fathom water. The Spaniards say it is a very beautiful island, abounds with trees, wild boars and other game, and excellent water, and there is plenty of fish on the coast. 5. The island of Mocha, where the Dutch under Spulberg found a very generous reception by the natives, who furnished them with plenty of sheep and other provisions in exchange for clothes, axes, etc. The north side of it is plain and low, but the south side rocky. 6. The island of Saint Maria, 13 leagues southwest from the city of Conception and 3 from Arauco. It's very fruitful and temperate, lies about latitude 37 and is well inhabited. 7. The islands of Pedro de Sarmiento, so called because he discovered them when in pursuit of Sir Francis Drake. They are about 80 in number and lie about latitude 50, so that we suppose them to be those now called the Duke of York's Islands, which lie a little to the northward of the Straits of Magellan. Our author comes next to Cuyo, the third quarter of Chile, which lies on the other side of the Cordillera towards the east. It is divided into several provinces and quite differs in temperature from Chile. The summer is excessive hot, and the inhabitants so annoyed with bugs and mosquitoes that they lie abroad in their gardens and yards. They have almost perpetual thunders and lightnings, and are mightily infested with poisonous insects. These are the bad qualities of the country, to compensate, which the soil in many places, if possible, exceeds that of Chile in fruitfulness. The crops are richer, the fruits larger, and of a better taste, because of the greater heats. They have store of corn, wine, flesh, and all the fruits, roots, and herbs of Europe, with large plantations of olives and almonds. The cold is not so sharp in winter as that of Chile, and the air much clearer, so that the season is then very temperate. They have great quantities of large excellent trouts and other river fish. Their peculiar fruits are, 1. Algorabo, of which they make a bread so sweet that strangers can't eat it. They supply Tucuman and Paraguay with figs, pomegranates, apples, dry peaches and grapes, and excellent wine and oil. Awali says that in his time there were rich mines of gold and silver discovered here, which were reckoned to be better than those of Potosi, and that, in short, it had all necessaries for life in as great abundance as any other country, and in general is very healthful. The provinces of Tucuman and Paraguay, which bound this country, we have already described. End of section 17.
Section 18 of a Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by S.S. Kim, Seoul, South Korea. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woods Rogers. To the East Indies. January 10. I now go on with my journal, being on our departure from California and returning to Great Britain. I shall not trouble the reader with every day's particular transactions in this long and tedious passage, but only take notice of such occurrences as are worth remark, and to satisfy the curious, shall subjoin a particular table of each day's run, with the latitude, longitude, and variation betwixt Cape St. Lucas on California and Guam, one of the Ladrones Islands. We resolved to keep an exact account of the distance and variation, not being certainly known to us from any former voyages. January 11th. We weighed from the Port Segura last night, but were becalmed under the shore till the 12th in the afternoon, where there sprung up a breeze, which soon ran us out of the sight of the land. We took our departure from St. Lucas, which bore north by east at 12 o'clock, distant about 15 leagues. We were forced to go away with little or no refreshments, having but 3 or 4 fowls, and a very slender stock of liquor, which we got out of the Bachelor. Several of our men were in a weak condition, besides myself, Mr. Vanbrugh, and the rest that were wounded. We were forced to allow but 1.5 pounds of flour, and 1 small piece of meat to 5 in a mess, with 3 pints of water a man for 24 hours for drink and dressing their victuals. We struck down 10 of our guns into the hold to ease the ship, for being out of the way of enemies, they are altogether useless betwixt this and the East Indies. On the 16th, the Bachelor made a signal to give us some bread, they having found a good quantity of bread and sweet meats aboard her, but little of flesh kind. We had 1,000 weight of bread for our share, the Duchess as much, and the Marquis 500 weight, in lieu of which we sent back to the prize 2 casks of flour, 1 of English beef, and 1 of pork, they having but 45 days' provision aboard in flesh. This morning Thomas Connor, a boy, fell overboard, but the launch being astern, we cut a mooring, and took him up just as he was tired with swimming and ready to sink. On the 26th in the morning the water was very much discolored, at which, being surprised, we immediately sounded, but found no ground. We spoke with the Duchess and agreed to go away west-southwest till we got into the latitude of 13 degrees, because our Spanish pilot told us it was dangerous going in 14 by reason of islands and shores, where a Spanish vessel was lost some time ago, ever since which the Manila ship in her return from Acapulco runs in latitude 13 and keeps that parallel till they make the island of Guam. On the 28th, the steward missing some piece of pork. We immediately searched and found the thieves. One of them had been guilty before and forgiven on promise of amendment, but was punished now, lest forbearance should encourage the rest to follow this bad practice. Provisions being so short and our run so long may prove of ill consequence. I ordered them to the main gears, and every man of the watch to give them a blow with a cat of nine tails, and their messmate, being privy to the theft, were put in irons. February 1st, we buried one boy betwixt 40 and 50 years of age, whom we brought from Guayaquil, where and in other parts of New Spain he had been a prisoner above 7 years, since he was taken in the Bay of Campeche. On the 5th, a Negro we named Deftfall died, who being much addicted to stealing of provisions, his room was more acceptable than his company at this time. On the 6th, we spoke with the Duchess. I was for augmenting the men's allowance in meat, since we had such a favorable gale, which was like to continue, but Captain Courtney objected against it, alleging that if we missed the Guam, we should all be starved, so we deferred it a week longer. We have had very bad luck in fishing hitherto, having took only one albicore since we came from Cape St. Lucas. On the 11th, I agreed with Captain Courtney to continue our west by south coast till we get clear of the rocks called the Bartholomew's, which are laid down in 13.5, but the distance of them being variously computed makes us the more cautious and keep a constant good lookout. On the 13th, the Spanish pilot we took in the Bachelor died. We kept him thinking he might be of use to us if he recovered of his wounds, but he was shot in the throat with a musket ball, which lodged so deep the doctors could not come at it. On the 14th, we agreed with Captain Courtney to give half a pound of flour or bread more to a mess. The same day, in commemoration of the ancient custom in England of choosing Valentines, I drew up a list of fair ladies in Bristol that were anyways related to or concerned in the ships, and sent for my officers into the cabin, where everyone drew and drank the ladies' healths in a cup of punch, and to a happy sight of them all. This I did to put them in mind of home. On the 17th, I was troubled with the swelling in my throat, which incommoded me very much, till this morning I got out a piece of my jawbone that lodged there since I was wounded. Our ship began to make more water, so we clapped on a new bonnet where we took the old one off, but after many fruitless attempts, were forced to keep one pump continually going, every 2 men in the watch taking their post once an hour, which labor with the want of sufficient food make our people look miserably. On the 18th, we threw a Negro overboard, who died of consumption and want together. Our men began to be very much out of order, and what adds to their weakness is our continual pumping, nor can we pretend to make any further addition to their allowance. On the 25th, Thomas Williams, a Welsh tailor, died. He was shot in the leg at engaging the second Manila ship, and being of a weak constitution, fell into a dysentery which killed him. On the 26th, we caught a couple of fine dolphins, which were very acceptable to us, having had but very indifferent luck of fish in this long passage. On March the 3rd, we buried a Negro called Augustine, who died of the scurvy and dropsy. We agreed to give 6 Negroes the same allowance as 5 of our own men, which will but just keep those that are in health alive. On the 10th we made land, being the island Serpina, which bore northwest distant about 8 leagues. The Duchess made another island to the westward, which bore west by south distant about 10 leagues. The latter they took to be the island Guam, so we clapped upon a wind and stood for it. March 11th. This morning we had the sight of both islands, the northernmost bearing north-northwest, distant about 7 leagues, and the body of westernmost west-southwest 5 leagues. The Spaniards say there is a great shore between these islands, but nearest to Serpina. We ran along the shore, being satisfied it was the island of Guam, from whence there came several flying prows to look at the ships. They run by us very swift, but none would venture aboard. At noon, the westernmost part of the island bore west, and at the same time we made a small low island joining to Guam, with a shore between it and Guam. The island appeared green and very pleasant. Off of it there runs a spit of sand to the southward, but keeping it a good berth from you as you near it, there is no danger, being gradual soundings to the shore. After we were clear of it, we sprung our luff and stood in for the harbour, which lies midway betwixt this and the north part of the island. There came heavy flows of wind offshore, sometimes for us, and at other times against us, but we got to an anchor in the afternoon in 12 fathom water, about half a mile offshore, where there was a little village. The small island to the southward bore south of us, distant about 3 leagues, and another small one to the northward bore north-northwest about 2 leagues. The necessity of our stopping at these islands to get a refreshment of provisions was very great, our sea store being almost exhausted, and what we had left was very ordinary, especially our bread and flour, which was not enough for 14 days at the shortest allowance. In order to recruit quietly, we endeavored to get some of the natives aboard that were in the prows, to keep them as hostages in case of sending any of our men to the governor. One of them, as we were turning into harbour with Spanish colours, came under our stern. There were 2 Spaniards in the boat who asked what we were and from whence we came. Being answered in Spanish that we were friends and came from New Spain, they willingly came aboard and asked if we had any letter to the governor. We had one ready, but before we could get it signed by all the commanders, there came a messenger from the governor, who demanded the same account of us. We immediately sent him away with 2 of our linguists, detaining one of the Spaniards till they returned. The letter was thus: So, we being servants to Her Majesty of Great Britain, and stopping at these islands in our way to the East Indies, will not molest the settlement, provided you deal friendly with us. We'll pay for whatever provisions and refreshments you have to spare, in such manner as best agrees with your conveniency, either in money or any necessaries you want. But if after this civil request you deny us and do not act like a man of honor, you may immediately expect such military treatment as we are with ease able to give you. This we thought fit to confirm under our hands, recommending to our friendship and kind treatment, which we hope you will esteem, and assure yourself we then shall be with the strictest honor. Your friends and humble servants. To the Honorable Governor of Island of Guam, March 23rd, 1709. W. Rogers, S. Courtney, E. Cook. March 11th. In the morning we and the Duchess manned our pinnace, sent her ashore with the flag of truce, where they were entertained courteously by the natives, who promised to supply us with such provisions as they could spare, provided the governor would give them leave. About noon our linguist returned and brought with him 3 Spanish gentlemen from the governor, who in answer to our letter sent another expressing all readiness imaginable to accommodate us with what the island afforded, and that he had sent those gentlemen to treat with us. I immediately sent for Captain Dover, Courtney, and Cook, and so on, being not able to stir out of the ship, and desired they would come and consult with me how to act. March 13th, this morning we had 4 bullocks, one for each ship, with some limes, oranges, and coconuts. Our misunderstanding at California have been very much augmented since by our want of provisions. One ship's company being jealous, the other had most and best. But now being arrived at a place of plenty, we are all indifferently well reconciled, and an entertainment was provided aboard the Bachelor for the Spanish gentlemen, where most of our officers appointed to meet. I being not able to move myself, was hoisted in a chair out of the ship, and also out of the boat into the Bachelor. There we had a good entertainment and agreed that on Thursday next a representative for each ship should wait upon the governor and make him a handsome present for his civility and readiness to supply us. March 15. This morning we had another entertainment aboard the Marquis, where I likewise went in the same manner as before. March 16. This morning our pinnace went with several of our officers to accept the governor's invitation ashore, who received them with all imaginable friendship and respect, having near 200 men drawn up in arms at their landing, and the officers and clergy of the island to conduct them to the governor's house, which was a very handsome seat, considering where we are. They entertained them with at least 60 dishes of several sorts, the best could be got on the island, and when they took their leaves, each fired a volley of small arms. They presented the governor, according as we had agreed, with 2 negro boys dressed in liveries, 20 yards of scarlet cloth serge, and 6 pieces of cambric, which he seemed wonderfully pleased with, and promised to assist us in whatever lay in his power. March 17. This day we got our dividend, being about 60 hogs, 99 fowls, 24 baskets of Indian corn, and 14 bags of rice, 44 baskets of yams, and 800 coconuts. March 18. There was an entertainment aboard us today, where we had most of our officers and 4 Spanish gentlemen from the governor. I made them as welcome as time and place would afford, diverting them with music, and our sailors dancing till night, when we parted very friendly. We got some more bullocks on board, being small in cattle, but what we gladly accept of, each ship had 14 in all. March 20. This morning each ship had 2 cows and calves more, being the last we are likely to get. We had a meeting on board the Marquis, where it was agreed to make a handsome present to the governor's deputy, who had the fatigue to get our provisions together, wherein he used all possible dispatch. We gave him and the rest of the gentlemen what they esteemed double the value of what we received of them, which they certified under their hands, and that we had been very civil to them. We also gave them the like certificate, signed by all our officers, to shew to any English that might have occasion to recruit there, and parted very friendly. Having finished that affair, it was agreed that we should steer from hence west and by south's course to get clear of some islands that lie in our way, and then thought it proper to steer directly for southeast part of Mindanao, and from thence the clearest way to Ternate. It was also agreed that our ship being very leaky, I should deliver to Captain Courtney 1 chest of plate and money to be put on board the Duchess. March 21st. At break of day we hoist our colours and fired a gun for our consort to unmoor. In the meantime, with the consent of the other officers, I put an old Spaniard ashore called Antonio Gomez Figuero, whom we took in the first bark in the South Seas, and designed to carry him to the Great Britain to condemn all our prices took there, but he being now in all appearance not likely to leave, we agreed to dismiss him, he giving us a certificate that he saw us attack and take several prizes, all subject to Philip IV, King of Spain, and so on. I gave him some clothes and other odd things to help him in his sickness, then put him ashore to the deputy governor and the rest of Spanish officers, who gave us a certificate that they received such a person. I shall here give a description of the Isle of Guam. The island of Guam described. This island is about 40 leagues round. The anchoring place is on the west side, and about middle there is a large cove, with several houses built after Spanish mode, with accommodations for the officers and crew of the Acapulco ship, the settlement being made here on purpose for that ship to recruit at in a way to Manila. There are about 300 Spaniards on this and the neighboring islands. Most of the natives are their converts. They told us they have 8 fathers, 6 of whom teach school, besides performing their office as a clergyman. They have also schools taught by mulattoes and Indians who have learned the language so that most of the natives understand Spanish. The Spaniard informed me that there is a range of islands from hence to Japan, among which there are several abound with gold, and they were now building a small vessel to discover them in order to get a trade. The island of Guam itself abounds with orange, lemons, citrons, musk, and watermelons, which were brought hither by the Spaniards. The orange trees thrive very well here. The island is full of hills and dales, and streams of good water. They have plenty of cattle, but small, poor, and generally white. The indigo plant grows wild in such abundance that were they industrious and had coppers to boil up, they might have great quantities of that commodity, but being so remote and out of way of the trade, they make no use of it, nor do they improve anything but what contributes to their present subsistence. And having that, they are easy. Money is of so little use, and so scarce among them, that they could not raise $1,000 in the whole islands to purchase commodities from us, which they would gladly have done. Here are about 200 soldiers who receive their pay from Manila by a small ship once per annum. This ship brings them clothes, sugar, rice and liquor, for which she carries back most of the money again. This has made them of late sow rice in their valleys and make other improvements. They abound with hogs, which are the best pork in the world, because they feed altogether on coconuts and breadfruits, which are plentiful here, and were not the Spaniards slothful, they might have most necessaries of their own growth for the maintenance of life. The breadfruit I thought the most remarkable thing on the island. I saw some of it which was as large as oranges and much resembled them. They tell me that when ripe they are 3 times as large and grow in many other places near equinox in the East Indies. The leaves are almost as large as those of figs, something like them, but of a brown color. The tree is large, and they have such plenty of these fruits in the season that they fatten their hogs with them. The fruit has no stone, and by the account they gave, the inside resembles a dried potato or yam, with which they likewise abound. The wind blows constantly a southeast trade here, except during the westerly monsoons, which last from the middle of June to the middle of August. The governor lives on the north side of the island, where there is a small village and a convent, being the chief habitation of the Spaniards. They marry with the natives, and had not above 4 Spanish women on the island. The Indians are tall and strong, of a dark olive color, go all naked except the cloth about their posteriors, and the women have little petticoats. The men are dexterous at flinging of stones, which they make of clay, of an oval form, burning them till as hard as marble, and are so good marksmen that the Spaniards say they seldom miss hitting any mark, and throw it with such a force as to kill a man at a considerable distance. I heard of no other weapons that they use, but a stick or lance made of heaviest wood in the island. The governor presented us with one of their flying prows, which I shall describe here because of the oddness of it. The Spaniard told me it would run 20 leagues per hour, which I think too large, but by what I saw, I verily believe. They may run 20 miles or more in the time, for when they viewed our ships, they passed by us like a bird flying. These prows are about 30 foot long, not above 2 broad, and about 3 deep. They have but one mast which stands in the middle, with the mainsail made in the form of ship's mizzen. The yard is slung in the middle, and man sits at each end with the paddle to steer her, so that when they go about, they don't turn the boat, as we do to bring the wind on the other side, but only change the sail, so that the tack and sheet of sail are used alike, and the boat's head and stern are the same. Only they change them as occasion requires to sail either way. For they are so narrow that they could not bear any sail, were it not from booms that run out from the windward side, fastened to a large log shaped like a boat, and near half as long, which becomes contiguous to the boat. On these booms a stage is made above the water, on a level with the side of the boat, upon which they carry goods or passengers. The greatest inconvenience in sailing these boats is before the wind, for by the outlayer, which is built out on one side, if the wind presses anything heavy on the contrary side, the boat is overset, which often happens. Having brought one of these boats to London, it might be worth fitting up to put in the canals in St. James's Park for curiosity, since we have none like it in this part of the world. As soon as the boat returned from landing Signor Figuro, we put on the sail, having the fine breeze of wind at east-northeast. We had generally fair weather here in the daytime, and showers commonly in the night, but very sultry. The wind always offshore betwixt the east and northeast. Our decks are filled with cattle and provender. According to promise, I have here inserted my run from California to Guam, a table of each day run between Cape St. Lucas in California and the island of Guam. There is a table of daily log from 12th of January till 10th of March about the course, distance, and location of ship. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the island of Guam bore west by south, distant 10 leagues. 1710, March 22nd. At 6 last night, the body of the island Guam bore east-northeast, distant 8 leagues, from whence we took our departure, designing for Ternate, one of the Molucca islands belonging to the Dutch, and distant from Guam about 400 leagues. We had a fresh gale of wind at northeast and northeast by east, with fair weather, but very sultry, latitude 12.45, variation 5.30 E. April 11th. Nothing remarkable has occurred worth noting, but that we have generally had a strong current setting to the northward. At 2 yesterday afternoon, we made land bearing southeast, distant about 5 leagues, being a low flat land, all green and full of trees, latitude 2.54 north. This island is not laid down in any sea chart. Our ship continues very leaky. April 14th. Yesterday in the afternoon we saw land bearing west-southwest 12 leagues, being very high. The current has set to the northward these 24 hours very strong, latitude 1.54. April 15. Yesterday in the afternoon we made other land, which bore west-northwest, distant about 10 leagues, and supposed it to be the northeast part of Celebes. We saw 3 water spouts, one of which had like to have broke on the Marquis, but the Duchess, by firing 2 shots, broke it before it reached her. We saw a very large tree afloat, with a multitude of fish about it, and 2 large islands, the southernmost bearing southwest, distant about 8 leagues, and the northernmost west-northwest 7 leagues, both being the same land we saw yesterday, and the latter we now suppose to be the southeast part of the Maritime, and the other the north part of Gilolo. At noon, the southernmost land bore southwest by south 10 leagues, and the westernmost 5 leagues north, latitude 02.13. April 17. We have a westerly gale, and the current setting against us. We gained little ground in turning to get about Maritime. We had indifferent fair weather all night and morning, but standing pretty much to the southward, lost sight of the land and a strong current setting to the northward. April 23rd. We had a very stormy weather for most parts since the 17th. The Marquis and we suffered both in our rigging, so that we begin to despair of getting to windward of this island Maritime to reach Ternate, which is now near us. But we are obliged to keep company with the Marquis and Bachelor, who sail but very indifferent upon wind. And it's the hardest upon our ship's company, who are wearied almost to death with continual pumping, the leak having increased upon us since we came out of Guam, so that it is as much as 4 men are able to keep her free half an hour, all the watch being obliged to come to it once in 4 hours. April 29th. We got 292 pounds weight of bread from the Bachelor yesterday afternoon. In exchange for meat we sent them, which, with what we had before, will last us about 20 days and not much longer. We begin to be very much disheartened, because Captain Dampier, who has been twice here, tells us that if we can't get Ternate or find the island Tulu, we can reach no port or place to recruit at, and that it will be impossible to get provisions for us on the coast of New Guinea, should we be forced to go thither, upon which I sent my opinion about our consort, and desired that they would call a committee and agree how to proceed next, which they did as follows. At a committee held on board the Bachelor frigate, April 29, 1710, it is agreed to make the best of our way to the island of Tula, where we are in expectation of supplying ourselves with wood, water, and provisions to cruise 10 or 12 days for this island, being uncertain of its situation, and in case the wind should present sooner, that we can fetch Ternate, than to make the best of our way for it. But if the wind should not present for Ternate, nor the island Tula, then if we see occasion, we make the best of our way to some port in Mindanao. And for all opportunities in going about and carrying a light, we leave it to Captain Courtney in the Duchess. May 2nd, we shaped our course for Ternate a second time, being in all probability to the westward of Gilolo, having made our reckoning 3 degrees of longitude to the westward of Maritime. May 3rd, about 8 this morning, we made land, which we took to be some of the islands lying off the northeast part of Celebes. It bore west-southwest of us, distant about 15 leagues. May 7th, fair weather till 4 this morning, when there came up a violent shower, with great flashes of lightning. At break of day we saw land trending from southeast by south to south-southwest, which at first appeared like a 5-island, but after it cleared up, we plainly perceived it was one continued land. We also saw other lands to the westward of that, which bore west by south, distant about 10 leagues, and were of opinion that we got to the eastward of Gilolo a second time. We were the more inclined to believe this, because whenever we tried the current, we generally found it set to the eastward very strong, though we little thought it could have driven us so far back. May 9th, yesterday in the afternoon, all the officers met aboard us to consult about the land, and what course to take, but being divided in opinions, we deferred coming to a resolution till such time as we were better satisfied. We tried the current at 4 o'clock, when it set north-northwest after the rate of 20 miles in 24 hours. We made no other land all day than that we first saw, so stood on and off all night, expecting a gale to run in with it in the morning, but having calms for the most part, and a current setting against us, we still lost ground, and made another round high hummock about noon, which bore southeast by east, distant 8 leagues, and the southernmost land bearing at the same time south by east 7 leagues, and the westernmost west by south 8 leagues. May 10th, I sent the pinnace aboard the Marquis with 12 hogshead and a barrel of water, their stock being almost spent, and in their way ordered them to speak with the bachelor and duchess to be satisfied what allowance of paddy, being rice in the husk, their men were at, because ours had a notion they had more than we. I having ordered them but £1.25 for 5 men, whereas before they had £2. Upon inquiry, I found the ship's companies fared all alike, but to make them easy, agreed with Captain Courtney and the rest to make it £2 again, at which allowance we have not above 12 days at most, being all the bread kind we have in the ship. May 12th. We were satisfied that many island and land we saw for these several days was the Strait of New Guinea. We spoke with the Duchess, who had been near the land where we perceived the greatest opening, and they told us the reason of their keeping in with the shores was with the design to have anchored, but meeting with irregular sounding, did not think it fit to adventure it. They sent their boat ashore to the easternmost small island to see what they could meet with. We stood within 1.5 miles of the shore, when the water began to discolor. We sounded and had 30 fathom water, and presently after about 6. So we went about and stood off till the Duchess' boat returned, who gave us an account that they had seen the tracks of turtle and men's feet with fireplaces lately made. These islands are in the same climate with the Spice Islands, and no doubt would produce spice if planted. I went on board the Duchess and agreed with Captain Courtney to send the pinnace ashore, standing on and off with our ship all night, latitude 00.24 south, longitude 236.25 west from London. May 13. We kept turning to windward these 24 hours, betwixt the southernmost long track of land we made first of all, and the islands to the eastward of it, where we expected to find the passage betwixt the Gilolo and New Guinea. May 15, we being jealous of each other, who had the most provisions, we this day met aboard the Bachelor, and carried an account with us of what each ship had left, and on making a strict rummage there, we found more rice than we expected, so that with the shortest allowance we may subsist at sea above 3 weeks longer. Each ship's proportion of the provisions we had left being weighed, we then returned to our ships in better state than we expected. May 18. We have passed several islands, and are now in sight of what we account the point or Cape of New Guinea, and the south end of the Gilolo, which appears about 8 leagues asunder. With some islands near each side, we have commonly little wind, and very bearable. This being the time that the southeast monsoon begins, which made the weather and wind very uncertain, latitude 2 south. May 20. The Duchess generally kept ahead in the night with the pinnace ahead of her, because the currents are so very uncertain, and being in an unknown track, we cannot be too careful in the night. We are still in sight of high land of New Guinea, and several islands to the northward, which we find laid down in no drought, so we noted them as we passed by. This way into India would not be half so dangerous as it is imagined, were it well known. While we had any breeze of wind, in the day we towed our prize. We made another long high island, trending from south by east to west-southwest, distant about 12 leagues, and crowded along shore to make what it was, judging it to be the island Ceram. We likewise made another island to the northward, which bore north by west, distant about 7 leagues, south latitude 03. May 21st. Being close under it, I sent the pinnace aboard the Duchess yesterday afternoon to know what they made of the land, and what they designed to do. Their boat met ours, and told them Captain Dampier was of the same opinion with us, that it is the island Ceram. May 22nd. Had an ugly gale of wind, which drove us clear off the island we took to be Ceram. Since the 18th that we passed the Straits of New Guinea, we have had the westerly current, but before the current generally set to the eastward. We now have dark gloomy weather, with a strong gale of wind at southeast, and southeast by east, runs us out of sight of all the land. Our ship is still very leaky, and we began to be in the utmost want of all manner of refreshment and necessaries, and doubtful where to harbour or refit, the land being unknown to us for want of good draft or an experienced pilot. Latitude 3.40 south, longitude 237.21 west from London. May 24, we were in expectation making land this morning, being in the latitude of the island Boro, which is about 20 leagues to the southwest of Ceram, and near the same distance in parallel with Amboina, the latter of which we designed to have touched at, had the wind been favourable. But southeast monsoon being now set in, we are almost out of hope of fetching it, and still doubtful what island we passed by last, not agreeing whether it was Ceram or Boro. We found by our observation at noon that we were in the latitude of southernmost part of Boro, and the reason of our not seeing of it we impute to the current setting us to the westward of it, south latitude 04.30, longitude 237.29, west from London. May 25th, I spared the Duchess a butt of water, they having little or none but what they can catch when it rains. We came to a resolution to spend no more time in search of Boro, nor to wait for a wind to carry us to Amboina, but to make the best of our way for the Straits of Bolton, where if we arrive safe, we might get provisions enough to carry us to Batavia. Pursuant to which agreement, we hauled away southwest by south for them, having a fresh gale of wind at east, but by 2 in the morning we fell in with a parcel of island to the eastward of Bolton, and had infallibly been ashore upon one of them, had not the weather cleared up at once. We made a shift, and wore the ships, then stood off northeast from the land till daybreak, when we saw it trending from south by east to southwest by south, about 6 leagues distant, which made like a fine large bay, but as we stood in, perceived an opening, and that there were 2 islands, with 3 lying toward to the outlet to the southward of both. We hoisted our pinnace and sent her ashore. The Duchess did the same, from whence they brought off some coconuts, which were very plentiful here, and told us they were Malayan inhabitants, who seemed to be very friendly. We kept turning in with our ships and our boats sounding ahead, designed to anchor, if we could find any ground, but found none with 60 or 80 fathom line. We saw land to the northwest of us, which we took to be the island Bolton, being pretty high and distant 8 or 10 leagues. South latitude 05.00, longitude 237.51. May 26. We could get no anchor ground all yesterday afternoon, though we run our bowsprit almost ashore, and having the current setting against us, made it a tiresome piece of work to fetch within the reach of the houses. At last some of the inhabitants came off in a canoe to our boats, as they were sounding ahead. They brought them aboard, and by signs we understood there was plenty of provisions ashore. I sent the pinnace and yawl to see what they could meet. In the meantime came several canoes full of Malayans with coconuts, pumpkins, Indian corns, fowls, and so on, to truck with our people. Ashore they had sheep and black cattle in plenty. The officers I sent were admitted into the presence of their king and nobles, who were all barefoot and most naked, save a clout about their posteriors. They seemed to be very courteous, and ready to supply us with what we wanted. We lay by and drove till morning, having little wind, that we might be nearer the other ships, and resolved what to do. We found no anchor ground, but too near the shore, and the current setting strong to the southwest, and driving us out, which, together with our having no anchor ground, if the wind should take us out of the sea, made us desist to attempt any further here. We agreed to stand over for the land to the west of us, the northernmost part of which bore west-northwest, distant 9 leagues, and the westernmost west by south, 10 leagues. The inhabitant called the easternmost of these islands Fancit, other next to it Capota, and the westernmost Cambever, south latitude 05.13, longitude 238.11 west. May 27th. We stood from these islands to the westward and ran alongshore as near as we durst to weather the westernmost point of land, where we expect to find the harbor, but as we neared it, found a long tract of high land trending to the southward as far as southwest by south. We agreed in opinion that it was the island Bolton, but that we had overshot the straits. We made sail to see if we could discover any land further to the southward, but finding none, we jogged on, keeping the wind as near as possible because of the current, which sets strong to the southwest. By 2 o'clock in the morning, we were horsed near a small island that bore south-southwest of us about 2 leagues, but having clear weather, we stood from it till daybreak, there being no other land near it that we saw, except that we came from, which we had opened 5 points farther to the westward. I was unwilling to act any farther without the consent of the committee, so the major part of us met aboard the Duchess, where we agreed to stand back and make a land plan, so as to be fully satisfied what it was, and withal to find the recruit of water and wood, before we proceed any farther, being in want of everything. South latitude 05.50, longitude west from London 238.38. May 28th. According to agreement, we stood back and having a fresh breeze of wind at east, came up with the land, which trended from northeast by east to north. We stood away with the northernmost, and by 6 o'clock brought it to bear east by north, distant about 2 leagues, having opened land farther to the northward, which made like a bay, and trimming to the westward as far as west-northwest, distant about 10 leagues. We made little or no sail all night, because the bachelor and marquis were astern, and we were not willing to run too far in with the land in the night. In the morning it was calm, and being clear weather, we made all the land very plain from west-southwest to the east-southeast, making high double lands with the island under it. Most of it looked as if it was inhabited, being pretty thick of wood, and promised fare for other refreshment, but we could find no anchor ground hitherto. May 29th. A breeze sprung up, and we ran farther in, keeping nearest the southern shore, where we opened a sandy spit, of which we could perceive blue water, like shoal ground running across the bay near Harper League. A little to the westward of this, we got ground in betwixt 30 and 40 fathom water, with good gradual soundings, where we let go our anchor. The Duchess and the rest, standing over to the other side of the bay, could meet with no ground, so they came back and anchored by us, south latitude 05.41, longitude 238.34 west from London. A little before this, our boat we sent returned from the shore, having by present engaged a canoe with some Malayans to come aboard with them, but for want of a linguist we were little the better. I sent to the bachelor who had one, but Captain Dover refused to let him come to me, although he had no use for him. Then I sent the second time, that I might know the best anchoring place for our ships, and treated the people, who were impatient to be gone, with sweetmeats and other things they fancied, but could not keep them or send them aboard the Bachelor to secure her, seeing white shoal water near us. But they passed by us in danger of running on the shoals, not knowing the best anchoring place, for want of the linguist I so earnestly desired to understand the Malayans that had now left us. As parting they made signs and pointed to the land to the northward, which they called Bulu. Our pilot, Captain Dampier, says he has been formerly through the straits, and in his book tells us of a town near the south part of them, where the king resided, but he knew nothing of it now, except the bare story. Upon this we agreed to send one of the pinnaces along with him and the linguist to find out the town, being willing to venture him to wait on His Majesty the King of Bolton to solicit for a supply of provisions, which we would gladly pay for, and to make the better appearance, we sent Mr. Vanbrugh and Mr. Connolly along with him. The water flows here above 15 feet. There are places near to the town which lie to the north was about 6 leagues, from whence we rode where a ship might, on occasion, be laid ashore to refit, and we should have carried the Duke there to stop a leak, but were not willing to lose time, since we found it did not increase more than 1 pump could vent, which we had men enough to keep continually going. The King of Boughton has several galleys built after a peculiar form, and other small embarkations, on which they say he can embark 8,000 men on any expedition. Our people that were upon the island tells me all the towns are built on precipice and hard to get at, and that the chief city was built on the top of a hill, to which there was only one passage, very steep. We found the watering place from a spring out of the rocks, but difficult to fill out of, because of its ebbing and flowing here, almost 3 fathoms, which dries the rock near the shore. May 30. This morning a messenger came from the king, with a letter from our officers that went to wait upon him, who were received very courteously, and promised a supply of provisions, in case we could come to an agreement. We showed the gentlemen samples of what we had to dispose of, which they seemed very well pleased with, and having made them a present of some odd things, and entertained them as well as we could, we dispatched them with the letter of directions to our officers what to do, and at their going off saluted them with 5 guns and 3 huzzas from each ship. We made a present to the king of Bishop's cap, being of little or no value to us, but what he highly esteemed and greatly accepted of. The inhabitants began to come off fast enough with Indian corn, coconuts, pumpkins, fowls, and so on, to trade with our people, but they were very dear compared with other islands we had been at. June 1st, we supplied ourselves indifferent well with wood and water, and our pinnace returned from the town with the mysterious account of their proceedings, and presently after Captain Dampier came with a small quantity of provisions, as a present to the commanders, having left our other 2 officers to dispatch away what they could agree for. June 2nd, this morning there came 3 or 4 of the better sort from the town, with a Portuguese linguist that belonged to Batavia, on the pretence of looking upon goods, and carrying samples of them to their king, but by their trifling, we are afraid we shall get nothing of them at last. We made much of the Portuguese, and gave him a small present, hoping he would influence the people to dispatch our business. We sent the Duchess pinnace with a letter to our officers to hurry away as fast as possible with what provisions they had got, and to agree, if they could, with the Portuguese linguist for a pilot, if they should give him $10 or $20 or more for a present.
June 3rd and 4th. Our ships have done watering and wooding, and the country people have brought off much provisions, so we conclude we are pretty well supplied for a fortnight or 3 weeks, which, with what we had before, may carry us to Batavia without any further recruit from the town, so that if we had our boat and men, it would be much more for our interest to be gone than to lie here and spend time to no purpose.
An officer aboard our ship, and other officers and men aboard Captain Courtney, began to be mutinous, and form a conspiracy against us, but we prevented it by chastising their leaders, whom we put in irons on board different ships to break the knot, which might otherwise have ruined the voyage. June 5th, the Duchess pinnace returned with Mr. Connolly, who acquainted us with the dilatory proceedings of King of Boughton, who, having got a quantity of provisions together, would have obliged us to take it at an extravagant price, and detained Mr. Vanbrugh till such time as the money was paid. In the morning there came some of his nobility with about 4 lasts of rice, which, for dispatch's sake, we immediately agreed for, and a cask of rack, after we had entertained them as well as time and place would afford. We sent them off in our pinnace. This morning the Portuguese linguist came with some provisions of his own to sell without any news from our people, which made us suspect they had some ill design upon us. Therefore we designed to keep him till the boat returned. But he got out of the ship before we were aware, he being jealous by his cold reception that we were uneasy, and rowed away as fast as possible. I sent the yawl after him, which, overtaking his canoe, the men all jumped overboard, but the Dutchess pinnace took them up, and our boat brought the Portuguese linguist aboard us, where, seeing he was likely to be confined, he sent the boat with the men up to the town, to desire our people might be dismissed as soon as possible. June 7th. This morning our pinnace returned with Mr. Vanbrugh and all our men, having parted very friendly with His Majesty, but could not get a pilot for money. However, we resolved to stay no longer, and to trust wholly to Almighty Providence for our future preservation. We dismissed the Portuguese linguist and began to unmoor our ships. We weighed on the 8th about 4 in the afternoon, and by 6 o'clock the westernmost land in sight bore west-northwest 9 leagues, and the southernmost southwest by south, distant 5 leagues. Bolton described. The island of Bolton is in latitude 05.20 south and near about 30 leagues long. The king, they say, can raise 50,000 men, and had all the adjacent islands under him. They boast of not valuing the Dutch, but I am satisfied their poverty is their greatest security. They speak the Malayan language, which is universal amongst all the islands of India. They are a well-set people, of a middle stature, or rather small, of a dark olive color, with the most indifferent features of any people that ever I saw.
They profess the Mahometan religion, but know little of it, save bathing, a few other ceremonies, as forbearance of hog's flesh, keeping many wives, and so on. Here are several Mahometan missionaries that came from Arabia and Persia to propagate their doctrine.
The Dutch have no settlement here, but trade for slaves and a little gold. The climate being near the same with Dutch Spice Island, I admire they don't raise quantities of spice, but no sort of it grows here, save a few nutmegs. End of section 18. Section 19 of a cruising voyage around the world. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by S.S. Kim, Seoul, South Korea. A cruising voyage around the world by Woods Rogers. East Indies to the Cape of Good Hope. June 9th, in the morning we made land from southwest to northwest by west, distant about 8 leagues, which we took to be the island of Zalea, south latitude 5.45, longitude west from London 240.21. We likewise saw a sail to windward of us, and taking it to be a Dutch vessel, we hauled near the wind till 8 o'clock. Then the Duchess and we made sail at once to speak with her, but the wind abating soon after, and she making the best of her way from us, we manned our pinnace and sent it after her. We made 3 islands to the northward of Zelaya, and the looming of other land to the westward of all, which we took to be the southernmost part of Celebes. June 10th, our pinnace came up with this small vessel, who told them they were bound for Makassar, a Dutch factory on the south part of the Celebes. The pinnace took the master of her board, being a Malayan, who promised to pilot us not only through the Strait of Zelaya, but to Batavia, if we would keep it secret for fear of the Dutch. He sent his vessel to lie in the narrow passage between the islands, till such time as our ships came up. About 4 o'clock we entered the strait and came betwixt the islands that are next to Zelaya, and another little one to the northward of that, being the middlemost of the 3, where we found a good passage, 3 leagues over, all deep water, steering from northwest by west
to give the larboard island a good berth. Then we made the southernmost part of Celebes. June 11th. The pilot promised to carry us through the channel. The great Dutch ship generally went for Batavia, and by that means avoid the shoals called the Brill and Bunker ground. The Brill has very uneven soundings, and in many places but 3 fathom water and less, so we hauled away to the northward, keeping the island Celebes aboard, the southwest part of which trends away in low land, with high mountains at the back of it. And off the point there lies a rock pretty high and remarkable. At 4 o'clock we came into soundings, and had 10 fathom first cast. The rock of southwest point bore then north, distant about 6 leagues, and we had an island ahead of us, from northwest by west to north-northwest, being low and level, about 3 leagues long, and near the same distance from the main as we entered betwixt them. It grew narrower. We steamed with the north part of the island till we came within a league and half of it, then steered north a little to weather a spit of sand lying off the island, by which means we opened 3 small keys. After we were clear of the shore, we hauled up northwest about 7, and came to an anchor under the island, behind the spit of sand, in 10 fathom water, very good clean ground. The rock of Celebes then bore northeast by north 4 leagues, the northernmost of keys west 2 leagues, and the middlemost west-southwest 3 leagues, the other being shut in with the long island. We kept the lead going all the way constantly through, and had never less than 6 fathom, nor more than 10. As soon as it was day, we weighed and went betwixt the 2 small keys, keeping nearest the northernmost, sounding all the way, and had no more than 10 fathom. The water still deepening, being clear of them, we hauled away west, then southwest, having a fresh gale of wind at southeast and southeast by east, no land in sight at noon, but part of the high land of Celebes, which bore east, distant about 12 leagues. It is well for us that we meet with this pilot, for having no good charts, nor anyone acquainted with those seas, we had run greater hazard. June 13, we made land a second time, which bore southwest by west, distant 6 leagues. June 14, we ran by the island of Madura, which is about 40 leagues long, lying east and west, on the north side of Java, the land we made in the morning, being the northeast part of it, which, agreeing with the pilot knowledge, made us the more certain. June 15, in the morning we fell in with the coast of Java, near the highland of Japara, which bore west by south, distant about 5 leagues. We had soundings betwixt 10 and 20 fathom, good easy ground, and saw abundance of fishing boats, but all kept at a distance. We got our guns out of the hold and scaled them, in order to be in a readiness against we come to Batavia, where in all probability we shall get 2 or 3 days more, it being not above 9 leagues from this place. By noon we brought the land of Japara to bear south by east, distant 4 leagues, having opened a large deep bay with other highland further to the westward, which bore west-northwest, distant 9 leagues, latitude 6.19 south, longitude 248.47 west from London. June 16, we made a small high hummocks the westward of highland we set yesterday noon, which at 6 o'clock bore west by south, distant 5 leagues. We hauled off west by west and west-northwest, and in the morning made the island of Caravan Java, Crimon Java, which bore northeast by north, distant 3 leagues, and also a ragged island to the eastward of it, bearing east-northeast 5 leagues, and 5 small keys to the westward, which are all called Caraman Java, Crimon Java. We had soundings most part of these 24 hours, betwixt 20 and 30 fathom OZ ground, latitude 6.7 south, longitude 250.14 west from London. June 17, we made the highland of Cheribon, which bore southwest.
In the morning we saw a great ship right ahead, and being very eager to hear news, I sent our pinnace aboard to know what she was. She proved a Dutch ship about 600 tons and 50 guns belonging to Batavia, and was plying to some of the Dutch factories for timber. They told us of Prince George's death, which we heard in the South Sea, but gave no credit to it then. That the wars continued in Europe, and that we had a good success in Flanders, and but little elsewhere. They likewise told us that it was about 30 Dutch leagues from hence to Batavia, but no danger. We borrowed a large draft, which are very useful to us, and left them at anchor. Toward noon we made the land, being very low, but had gradual soundings by which we were satisfied in the night how to sail by the sand. June 20th, in the afternoon we saw the ships in the road of Batavia, betwixt 30 and 40 sail, great and small, and got happily to anchor just after sunset, betwixt 6 and 7 fathom water, at the long-desired port of Batavia, latitude 6.10 south, longitude 252.51 west from London. By our reckoning here, we altered our count of time, having, as customary, lost almost 1 day in running west so far round the globe. June 22nd, we waited on His Excellency, the Governor-General, whom we acquainted with the necessity we lay under to refit our ships. He was pleased to see and approve our commissions as private men of war, and promised he would meet the council, and soon resolve us how far he could afford such assistance as we desired. June 30, I am still very weak and thin, but I hope to get time and leisure to recover my health. During these 10 days I was not able to go much on board, and whenever I went, found that till then I was a stranger to the humours of our ship's company. Some of them were hugging each other, others blessing themselves that they were come to such a glorious place for punch, where they could have arrack for 8 pence per gallon, and sugar for 1 penny a pound. Others quarrelled who should make the next boil, for now the labour was worth more than the liquor, whereas a few weeks past a bowl of punch to them was worth half the voyage. 8 days ago the doctor cut a large musket shot out of my mouth, which had been there near 6 months, ever since I was first wounded. We reckoned it a piece of my jawbone, the upper and lower jaw being much broken, and almost close together, so that the doctor had much ado to come at the shot to get it out. I had also several pieces of my foot and heel bone taken out, but God be thanked, am now in a fair way to have the use of my foot, and to recover my health. The hole the shot made in my face is now scarce discernible. I proposed the calling of committee to regulate our affairs, wherein we agreed as follows. At a committee held on board the Bachelor frigate June 30, 1710, in the road of Batavia, it is agreed to pack and repack all goods that appear damaged, and to let other bales that are not, nor have not been apparently damaged, to be only new covered with wax cloth or tarpaulins, if necessary, in every ship, and that Mr. Vanbrugh and Mr. Goodall be at every place, and the rest of the agent be accountable to them, and they to leave a duplicate of the whole with the other two, and be always ready to give an account to a general committee. Secondly, that Captain Courtney do provide the ships with all manner of necessaries, as fast and wanting, and as soon as Captain Rogers is in health, that he assist in it, that every one give a list to them of what they want from time to time. That Mr. Charles Pope do continue ashore, and send off provisions for all the ships, and keep a book of the whole. Let every ship take their daily turn to divide the meat, and send it off as early as possible in a country port, and as near as he can, no more, no less than 350 pounds weight, every other day, or as often as he can conveniently. Let him send off greens, carrots, eggs, and any other small refreshment, more than the common allowance, to be equally divided with the meat. Thirdly, that a suitable quantity of rack and sugar be sent aboard each ship to give a quartermass to the ship's companies, but whilst on the crane, the allowance may be enlarged as the commanding officers think convenient. Fourthly, if anything not included is necessary to the dispatch and outset of our ships, considering the trouble and loss of time to meet in a whole committee, we, to prevent dilatory proceedings, unanimously leave such things to Captain Thomas Dover, Captain Woods Rogers, Captain Stephen Courtney, and Captain Edward Cook, who are to agree on a time and place to meet, and have the same power in this affair as a whole committee. That if anything requires such dispatch, that the four cannot be present at a time, then any three of them together, agreeing and signing what they have done for the satisfaction of the rest, shall be sufficient, but otherwise we desire them to act in conjunction. Fifthly, we agree to continue Mr. Carlton Vanbrugh, agent of the Duke, Mr. James Goodall, agent of the Duchess, to make Mr. John Viger, agent of the Bachelor, and Mr. Joseph Parker, agent of the Marquis, to keep a strict account of what they can in each ship, and to preserve and take care of the general interest to the utmost of their power. Sixthly, we likewise agree to divide the plunder on board the Bachelor, and in order thereto we appoint Captain William Dampier and Mr. Thomas Glendale to be judges what ought to be divided as plunder, who are to govern themselves as near as possible by our resolution in a committee of the 9th of July, 1709. And in order to dispatch matters quietly without loss of time, we appoint Mr. John Bartlett, Mr. Lancelot Appleby, Mr. Alexander Selkirk, and Mr. Joseph Smith to act for the officers in apprising and dividing the said plunder, and we allow the sailors to agree on a man from each ship, who is to act in conjunction with them, and in the whole to promote the general good with the utmost sincerity and dispatch. We also appoint Mr. Carlton Vanbrugh and Mr. James Goodall to be in the place when the plunder is opened or divided, and to receive what belongs to the cargo. Seventhly, it is further resolved for our general safety that all trading be prohibited by any of us with the inhabitants of this city of Batavia, or this island of Java, or any part of India, and to the end that no person may plead ignorance, a protest shall be drawn up and published at the mast of each ship, prohibiting the aforesaid commerce, and protesting against all damages arising through the same, and the person found guilty of it. Eighthly, it is also agreed that a reward of 100 $100 shall be given to the pilot we made use of from the Strait of Zelaya to this port. Ninthly, it is further agreed that the Marquis shall go first upon the crane, and then to be next followed by the Duke, the Duchess to be the last. Tenthly, we have considered the charge and method of our outset, and do agree, in order to promote dispatch, that 10,000 pieces of 8 be delivered to Captains Dover, Rogers, Courtney, and Cook, tomorrow being the 1st of July, 1710, signed by the majority of our council. The committee did likewise resolve on supply of the money to the officers as follows. At a committee held in Batavia Road, July 1st, 1710, we have resolved to supply these officers of the Duke, Duchess, Marquis, and Bachelor with the following sums to provide themselves with necessaries in our long passage to Europe. Pieces of 8. To Captain Thomas Dover, 2,000. Captain Rogers and Captain Courtney for their present expenses, 400. Captain Cook, 800. Mr. Fry and Mr. Stratton, 1,000. Captain Dampier, 200. Mr. Pope, 350. Mr. Glendale and Mr. Connolly, 700. Mr. Vanbrugh, 250. Mr. Thomas Bridge and Mr. Milborn, 100. Mr. Norman and Mr. Selkirk, 80. To the 3 doctors of the Duke, Duchess, and Marquis, 90. To the doctor of the Bachelor, 20. To Mr. Goodall and Mr. Appleby, 80. Total, 6,070.
All these sums we ordered Mr. Vanbrugh and Mr. Goodall to discharge out of the money on board the Duke or Duchess, as either commanders shall think convenient, whenever the above-mentioned officers shall demand it, and the receipt to Mr. Vanbrugh and Mr. Goodall, so far as is here ordered, shall be sufficient. Witness our hand, July 1st, 1710.
Signed by the majority of our council. July 2nd, from the 22nd of the last month, we lay leaky and in a very ordinary condition, not knowing when and how the General would please to order us assistance, according to our present necessities, which were then laid open to him, and this day, to shew that we should sufficiently vindicate and justify all our proceedings like honest men, we gave in an abstract of our voyage from the day we set sail out of King Road to the day we arrived in Batavia, which they desired to see before they would assist us, so we gave it them as short as possible. July 7th. Today our men finished appraising and dividing the plunder clothes in the Bachelor, which being tolerable good, amounts to about 400 pounds sterling. July 8th. This day, after a great many dilatory answers, we were at last permitted to make preparations for careening at Horn Island, which is about 2 or 3 leagues to the northward of the road, but were by no means suffered to go to the island unrest, where all the Dutch ships are cleaned. Being only allowed 8 or 10 Malayan caulkers and small vessels to put our goods in.
The Marquess began to careen about her, but the carpenters having viewed her betwixt wind and water, finding her very bad, and that she had but a single bottom, it to a honeycomb by the worms, they judged her altogether unfit to go to Europe, whereupon I desired the committee to meet and agree to dispose of her as follows.
It is agreed that, having now discharged the Marquess of her cargo brought from the South Sea, and finding great part thereof perished through the weakness of the ship, and damage of the worms which had eaten through her bends, and good parts of her bottom like a perfect honeycomb, we have considered our present condition, with the great charge and loss of time to repair her here, and judging our 3 ships sufficient and capable to carry the remaining parts of her cargo, we, according to the best of our judgment and information from a view made by the carpenters, do believe it for our safety and benefit for the concerned, to sail the said ship the Marquess here as soon as possible, for the most she will yield. And we do appoint Captain Wood Rogers, Captain Stephen Courtney, Captain Edward Cook, and Captain Thomas Dover to treat of and conclude the sale, letting the purchaser have sufficient power, as far as we are capable, to condemn her. Signed by the officers of the committee. July 20th. The Marquess being condemned to sail, we had the caulkers aboard us to make all manner of dispatch for careening. Our ship being very leaky, we thought it high time to wait on the governor with the following representation, which we got put into Dutch, but could not get the Sabander to introduce us, as the custom is here. Therefore we went ourselves, and gave present to the Dutch guards to let us in to see the General. After an hour's waiting, we were admitted and delivered him a copy of our commissions, and were promised assistance, but finds it's no more than what he can't have a pretence to deny us. Our memorial was as follows. To His Excellency, the Governor-General and Council of the Dutch East India Company. About 4 weeks ago we arrived here and waited upon your Excellency, acquainting you with our circumstances, which, according to your order, we delivered the same day in writing to your Sabander, and have daily waited upon him for your resolution thereupon. He has since visited our several ships, and we question not but all things appear to him agreeable to our representation. We have lain some time ready with leaky ships to go to the place appointed us to careen at, only waiting for a careening vessel to heave down by, which we humbly crave you will be pleased to order us. Delays are very prejudicial to our ships that have been long without the benefit of a friend's port, which we earnestly request you will please to consider. We have deferred traveling you in daily hopes of an order for our assistance by the proper officer, till we can no longer account for our loss of time without a direct application. We hope for a continuance of the common benefits and refreshments, and on our part shall persevere to behave ourselves with all due regard and respect to the government and customs of this city. Batavia, July 20th, 1710, Woods Rogers, Stephen Courtney. The governor immediately ordered us a vessel to Corinne, and we took our leaves. July 23rd, we went over to Horn Island, having a pilot to direct us and a sampan ready to heave down by and take in our guns, carriages, and so on, anchored on the south side of the island in 5 fathom water, about a stone's cast offshore, where we careened. We continued refitting our ships and repacking our goods with a great deal of difficulty till the 13th of September, during which time nothing remarkable happened, but that after I had refitted as well as I could on Horn Island, I returned to the road of Batavia. Many of our men fell ill of fevers and fluxes, occasioned, as I was informed, by their drinking the water upon the island. We buried here John Bridge, our master, as also the gunner of the Duchess, with another of her crew and one belonging to the Bachelor. The season being so far spent and the wind blowing fresh on Horn Island, I could not go again thither to careen my ship, though she needed much. Therefore we tried to get an order to careen at Unrest, where the Dutch careens their own, as we might have done ours in a few days, and with little trouble. I wrote from hence on the 21st of August to my owners by the Nathaniel, an English East India ship, bound directly for England, to let them know of our safe arrival here with our effects, and that we hoped to be with them in a very short time. On the 15th we called committee and came to the following resolution. Batavia, September 15th, 1710. At a committee held then, it is agreed to divide the money received for a quantity of plates sold amongst the several ships' company, being what had been adjudged plunder. Also that we should make out a request and deliver it the first opportunity to the general, to the following purpose, viz. To gain leave, if possible, to careen the Duke at Unrest, and so on. Also for leave to set up the markets for sale here, and for a supply of 10 hogsheads of Dutch beef and pork, with the permission to buy and carry aboard some rags and sugar for the 3 ships' stores for our company, and so on. It is also agreed to allow the following particulars for the use of the officers in the great cabin of each ship, namely, to each ship as follows: 2 firkins of butter, 2 gallons of sweet oil, 400 casks of bread or rusk, 100 pounds of weight of flour, 400 pounds weight of tamarinds, half a liquor of Spellman's nip or the best sort of arrack, 3 cheeses, the 3rd part of liquor of Cape wine, 3 packets of fine sugar, also $60 of Spanish money to buy small necessaries. Signed, Thomas Dover, President, William Dampier, Woods Rogers, Charles Pope, Stephen Courtney, William Stratton, Edward Cook, John Connolly. Rummaging today in the powder room, we found a leak 3 or 4 foot under water, which we did our best to stop. All English ships are allowed by the government here half a liquor of arrack a man for the ship's use, and it is counted as part of the provisions, but our boats are not suffered to bring the least thing offshore without being first severely searched. This, though we pay more, will likewise hinder all manner of traffic with any one here. Our chief officers have also prevented it aboard, and narrowly watched our crews, so that I doubt they will want several necessaries that this place affords. This we do to avoid giving the India Company in England any pretence to clamour against us at home on account of our trading here without their permission. We requested the governor to have liberty to sell the markets by the inventory to the highest bidder at the public sale, but the Sabando, or chief custom house officer for foreigners, told us it was the governor and council's resolution to publish at the sale that if any Dutch freemen should purchase the ship, they must either rip her up or burn her. This we thought another great hardship, that we could not get Dutch carpenters at liberty to careen and refit her at unrest, nor get freedom of sale. So we drew up a request and got it put in Dutch, resolving to wait on the general to set forth the hardship we are under, and likewise request to careen the Duke at unrest, where we might have Dutch carpenters, that being the only fit place. Now the weather and wind was changeable, and we could not do it at any other islands. But when Captain Courtney and I came to the castle to wait on the general, the guards told us they had orders that no Englishman should be admitted without the sabanda, and that they durst carry no paper or message from us to the Governor-General. We waited till past the middle of day, then addressed ourselves to one of the Reds of India, who used to listen to the English when any was imposed on. He treated us very handsomely with our linguist, Mr. Vanbrugh and Mr. Swart, at his house, and said he believed we had not justice done us, but the Sabanda being the general's near relations, he should make enemies if he appeared in our affair, and could advise us no better than to try what we could do again with the Sabanda, who we knew was inflexible. So we were forced to be silent and let this drop, that we might dispatch for the Cape of Good Hope as fast as possible, the best season for our passage being now at hand. July 30th. The plunder money was shared on the 24th instant, which amounted to 26 shillings a share, being what was adjudged as plunder when at the island of Gorgona, to which I refer. October 7th. This week we made all preparation for sailing, having got most of our stores aboard, and discharged the Marquis, which was so leaky that we sold her to Captain John Opie, commander of the Oldie frigate, lately arrived from London, for 575 Dutch dollars, being an extraordinary bargain. We had been offered much more before by another person, but then I could not prevail with the majority of our council to consent to the sale. October 12th. At daybreak this morning, we, our consort and prize, weighed out of the road, taking the first of land breeze. About noon came to again in 11 fathom water, about a mile to the northward of Horn Island. We had several English gentlemen aboard our ships, who favoured us with the company out of the road, there being several that arrived during our stay here. English ships that arrived and sailed hence during our stay. Frederick, Captain Priff, arrived July 23rd, sailed July 29th from Bencoolen, bound to Ditto. Rochester, Captain Staines, arrived July 6th, sailed the 21st from England, bound to China. Nathaniel, Captain Niggers, arrived July 27th, sailed August 27th from Bencoolen, bound to England. Stringer, Captain Pike, arrived August 30th from England, bound to China. We left her there, she having lost her passage to China. Ollie, Captain Opie, arrived September 9th from England, left there behind us. Here follows a description of Batavia. Although this place is well known and has been so frequently described, yet being such a noble settlement and proof of the industry of the Dutch in these parts, I can't omit giving the following account of it. The town lies on the northwest side of the island of Java, latitude 5.50 south. The time we are here it was not very healthy. The east and west winds blow all the year along the shore, besides the ordinary land and sea winds, which qualifies the air and makes it pleasant. Otherwise it would be excessive hot. The summer begins in May, with continual breezes from the east, and a very clear sky till the latter end of October, or beginning of November, when the winter begins with hard rains, which hold sometimes 3 or 4 days without intermission. In December, the west wind blows very violently, so that then there is a little trade on the coast of Java. In February, it is changeable weather with sudden thunderstorms. In March, they begin to sow. June is their pleasantest month. In September, they gather in their sugar and rice, and in October they have plenty of fruits and flowers, plants and herbs of most sorts. There is a large fenny plain country before the city, but is well improved by the Dutch, and to the eastward it is very full of woods and morasses. The city is foursquare with a river running through it, and fortified by a stone wall and 22 bastions. About 10 years past, there was an earthquake which broke down part of the mountains in the country and altered the course of the river, so that the canals in and about Batavia are not near so commodious as they have been, nor the entrance into the river so deep, and for want of strong current of water to keep it open, they are forced to employ a large engine worked with the horses to preserve the entrance of the river navigable for small vessels to come into the canals of the city. It lies on a bay in and about which there are 17 or 18 islands, which so break off the sea, that though the road is very large, yet it is safe. The banks of the canals through the city are faced with stones on both sides, as far as the boom, which is shut up every night at 9 o'clock, and guarded by soldiers. There's channels cut out of the main river for smaller vessels, and everyone that passes the boom pays custom. All the streets run in a straight line, most of them being above 30 foot broad, on each side clear of the canals, and paved next to the houses with bricks. All the streets are very well built and inhabited, 15 of which have canals, and they reckon 56 bridges on them, most of them made of stone. The country seats and buildings around the city are generally neat and well contrived with handsome gardens for flower and fruits, and adorned with springs, fountains, statues, and so on. The vast quantity of coconut trees everywhere afford delightful and profitable groves. They have fine structure here, particularly the cross church built of stone, and the inside very neat. There are 2 other churches for Dutch and 2 for Portuguese Protestants, who are a mixed breed of people. There is 1 church also for the Protestant Malayans. The townhouse is built of brick in a square about center of the city. It is 2 lofty stories high and very finely built, where all courts of advice are held and all matters relating the civil government of the city are determined, and the senators and directors of military affairs meet. There is an inner court enclosed with a high wall and a double row of stone pillars, where the officers of justice live. Here are hospitals, spin houses, and rest houses, the same as in Amsterdam, with all other public buildings equal to most cities in Europe. The Chinese have also a large hospital in this city for their aged and sick persons, and manage their charity so well that you never see a Chinese look despicable in the street. The Dutch women have great privileges in India than in Holland or anywhere else, for on slight occasions they are often divorced from their husbands and share the estate betwixt them. A lawyer told me at Batavia he has known out of 58 causes, all depending in the council chamber, 52 of them were divorces. Great numbers of the natives who are criminals and not executed after condemnation are chained by pairs and kept at hard labor under guard, perpetually clearing the canals and moats round the city, or any other labor for the public. 3 leagues west from the town is the island Unrest, where all the company's ships are refitted. There are great magazines of naval stores, defended by platforms of guns, and the castle at Batavia is quadrangular, lies in a level, and has 4 bastions and courtins faced with white stones and provided with watch-houses. In this castle, or rather citadel, the Dutch Governor-General and most of the members of the Council of India, with other officers of Batavia, have their residence. The Governor's palace is of brick, large and well built. In this palace is the council chamber, the secretary's office, and chamber of accounts. The great hall is hung with bright armor, ensigns, flags, and so on, taken by the Dutch here. The governor gives audience to strangers who are introduced to him by the sabandar, who is chief custom master. Here is also a church within the castle, and armory with apartments for all artificers belonging to the castle, which has 4 gates, and all the avenues well defended, the whole being surrounded with ditches and works well mounted with brass cannon, as are the bastions of the town with blockhouses within the walls, so that they can fire upon the mutineers within, as well as upon an enemy without. The outworks of the town, of which there are several every way at 4 leagues distance, are made of earth, surrounded with ditches and quickset hatches, which render them arbors for beauty, and some of them faced with brick. The garrison on duty is generally about 1,000 strong, and all the outworks are said to be furnished with good stocks of provisions as well as the castle. But the soldiers are kept much under, except the governor's guard, who have large privileges and make a fine appearance. The governor-general lives in as great splendor as a king. He has the train and guards, having a troop of horse, and a company of foot with a halberd in liveries of yellow satin, richly adorned with silver laces and fringes, to attend his coach when he goes abroad. The guards are as well equipped as most princes in Europe. His lady has also her guards and train. He is chosen but for 3 years out of the 24 councillors called Rats of India, 12 of whom must always reside in the city. The Chinese have the greatest trade here, farm most of the excise and customs, live according to their own laws and idolatrous worship, and have a chief that manages their affairs within the company, who allow them great privileges, and particularly a representative in council, who has a vote when any Chinese is tried for life. But these privileges are allowed only to such Chinese as inhabit here, for others are not admitted to stay above 6 months in the town, or on the island Java. The other strangers who inhabit here, besides Europeans, are Malayans with some people from most part of India. The Javanese or ancient natives are numerous, and said to be barbarous and proud, of a dark color, with flat faces, thin short black hair, large eyebrows and cheeks. The men are strong-limbed, but the women small. The former have a wrapper of calico, 3 or 4 times round their bodies, and the latter from their armpits to their knees. The men have 2 or 3 wives beside concubines, and the Dutch say they are much addicted to lying and stealing. Those on the coast are generally Mahometans, but the others pagans. The women are not tawny as the men, and many of them handsome, but in general amorous and unfaithful to their husband or others, being very apt to give poison, which they do very cunningly. It would be too tedious for me to describe all the remarkable things I saw at Batavia. In short, I was perfectly surprised when I came hither to see such a noble city and Europeans so well settled in the Indies. The town is very populous, but not 1/6 of them Dutch. The Chinese here go all bareheaded, with their hair rolled up, and long gowns, carrying fans in their hands. The Dutch say they are more industrious and acute in trade than themselves. The discipline and order of the Dutch here, both in civil and military affairs, is admirable. They have all necessaries for building and careening ships, as well as in Europe, and their officers as regular as in a Majesty's yard, whereas we have nothing like it in India. They keep the natives very much in awe, being perfectly despotical in their government over them, because they say the natives are naturally so treacherous that they are obliged to punish them severely for small faults. But they are favorable to the Chinese because of the great trade they have by their means, and that they pay great rents for their shops, besides large taxes, and from 16 to 30% for money, which they frequently borrow of the Dutch. I was told there are about 80,000 on the island who pay a Dutch $1 a head each month for liberty to wear their hair, which they are not allowed to do at home since they were conquered by the Tatars. There comes hither from China 14 or 16 large junks yearly, being flat-bottomed vessels, from 3 to 500 tons apiece. The merchants come along with their goods, which are lodged in different partitions in the vessel, like warehouses, for which they pay a certain price, and not for the weight or measures of their cargo, as we do, so that they fill them with what they please. They come in with an easterly monsoon, and generally arrive in November or December, and return the beginning of June, so that the Dutch have all Chinese commodities brought to them cheaper than they can fetch them, and being conveniently situated for the spice trade, they have all in their own hands. Batavia wants no commodities that India affords. It is pity our East India Company has no settlement to which the Chinese might resort, which I presume would turn to a much better account than our going China does, where our traders are but indifferently used. It is about 5 years since we quitted Benjar in the island of Borneo, which, by all accounts I had here, might, if well improved, have been as serviceable to our East India Company as Batavia is to the Dutch, who have seldom less than 20 sail of ships at the Isle of Java, from 30 to 50 and 60 guns each, with men enough for them on all occasions, so that they might easily drive us out of most parts, if not all India, should we ever have an unfortunate war with them. Their soldiers are very well trained, and there is a company always on duty at every gate of the city and citadel, and they have 7,000 or 8,000 disciplined Europeans in and about the city, who can be ready for action at a very short warning. It is the metropolis of their Indian settlement, and sends governors and officers to all the rest. The late general, before we came hither, had war with the Indians, which I was informed had like to have spoiled their settlement, but at last they divided the natives among themselves, brought them to a peace on advantageous condition, and are now pretty secure of the sea coasts. There are many pleasant seats about the city, and the adjacent country abounds with rice, sugarcane fields, gardens and orchards, mills for sugar, corn and gunpowder, so that this city is one of the pleasantest in the world. I don't think it's so large as Bristol, but it is more populous. They have schools for Latin, Greek and so on, and a printing house. They have lately begun to plant coffee here, which thrives very well, so that in a little time they may be able to load a ship or two, but I am told it is not so good as that of Arabia. October 12th, we, according to order from our owners to keep our ships fully manned, if the war continues till our return, shipped here 17 men, most of them Dutch. The Duchess and Bachelor near the same number, so that we are all well manned, and though we looked upon our hardship to be over, several ran from us here that came out of England with us, being straggling fellows that can't leave their old trade of deserting, though now they have a good sum due to each of them, so that their shares are by contract due to those that continued. October 17th, we got to the watering place on the main, within Prince's Island to Java Head. The chief of our business here was to get water and wood for our passage to the Cape of Good Hope, which we completed in 4 days' time. But in the interim, a misfortune befell us, which occasioned our stay longer on account of a boat lent us by Captain Pike, commander of the stranger galley, who followed us hither from Batavia, after a servant of his who was brought away by Captain Dover in the Bachelor. October 23rd, the boat was missing, but came back with all the men safe, and we returned her to Captain Pike, who had his servant and took his leave of us. We had the following council just before we came to sail. In a committee on board the Duke, October 23rd, 1710, at Java Head. It is agreed that we make the best of our way from hence to the Cape of Good Hope, and if through misfortune any ship should lose or part company, either by bad weather or otherwise, they are to go to the Cape of Good Hope, and if they don't find other ships, to stay there 20 days. But if within that time the missing ship or ships don't appear, then to make their utmost dispatch for the island St. Helena, and if not there, to proceed thence
according to the owner's orders for Great Britain. Signed by the majority of our council. October 24th. At 4 in the afternoon, Java Head bore northeast by east, distant 10 or 12 leagues, which being the last sight we had of it, from that we took our departure. October 25th. A fresh gale of wind at southeast with fair weather, but an ugly swelling sea. This morning, in stowing our best anchor, Joseph Long, a sailor fell overboard, and being no swimmer, before we could get the boat out to his assistance, was lost. Nothing remarkable happened till the 27th of December, but that my ship proved so leaky that on the 31st of October she had near 3 foot water in the hold, and our pumps being choked, we were in such danger that we made signals and fired guns for our consort to come to our relief, but had just sucked her as the Duchess came up. The 10th of October she sprung a new leak, which we could not fully stop, though we used all our endeavours, and at the same time I had been for the most part confined to my cabin by illness ever since I left Batavia. The 28th of December, Mr. James Wace, our chief surgeon, died, and we buried him decently next day without naval ceremonies as usual, being a very honest, useful man, a good surgeon, and bred up at Leiden in the study of physics as well as surgery. We made land the 15th of December, came in with the shore the 18th, and had soundings in 60 and 70 fathom. The ground grey-gret, with small stones and shells, had a strong southerly current. South latitude 34.2, longitude west from London 334.34. End of section 19.
Section 20 of A Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wayne Anderson, Chelsea, Quebec. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers. At the Cape of Good Hope. The 27th of December we came up with Cape Falso, betwixt which and the Cape of Good Hope there's a deep bay, and about a third over from the cape there's a shoal, which breaks for a good distance, but plain enough to be seen. By noon we were abreast of the cape, and saw the table land, south latitude 34·14. The 28th we had very hard flaws of wind off the high land, till we came within sight of the Lion's Head and Rump, 2 hills over the Cape Town. This day we arrived in the harbour of the Cape, saluted the Dutch fort with 9 guns, and were answered by 7. We anchored in 6 fathom water, about a mile offshore, and found only 1 English ship called the Donegal, Captain Cliff, commander, homeward bound from Mocha, and 2 Middleburgers outward bound for Batavia in the harbour, besides the guard ship and 2 or 3 galliots. The 29th, we moored our ship and got down our yards and topmasts to guard against the hard flaws of wind off the tableland, which frequently blow very fresh betwixt east, southeast, and southeast. We sent 16 sick men ashore. We spent till the 18th of January, 1710-11, in watering and refitting, and then held the following committee. On the 18th, the committee met ashore and agreed as follows. The 3 ships, wanting several necessaries and provisions, we agree that Captain Rogers and Captain Courtney do bring 100 weight of plate ashore, from either Duke or Duchess, and 60 ounces of unwrought gold, with all the coined gold or silver that is in both ships. We likewise empower them, in conjunction with Captains Dover and Cook, to purchase what necessaries are wanting for the whole, and to sell what goods are fit to be disposed of here, if not too much to our disadvantage, rather than exchange more gold or silver. We also desired they would agree for a cable and anchor, now wanting for the Duke, in place of her sheet anchor and cable, lately put aboard the Bachelor for her security. Thomas Dover, President, Robert Fry, Woodes Rogers, John Connolly, Stephen Courtney, Lan Appleby, William Dampier. On the 1st of February, I offered some proposals in writing to Captains Dover and Courtney, with the rest of the committee, wherein I told them 'twas my opinion we should lose too much time to stay for the Dutch fleet in order to have the benefit of their convoy to Holland, which would not only be out of our way, but very tedious and chargeable. And we, having large quantities of decaying goods on board, the time we should lose by waiting for the Dutch might be advantageously employed in Brazil, where we could lie in with very little danger of the enemy, and vend them at great rates, and thence get to Bristol through the North Channel, having the summer before us, continuing in the latitude of 55 or 56 degrees, 200 or 300 leagues before we get the length of the north of Ireland, and by that means might avoid the track of the enemy. I earnestly pressed that, if they could not agree to this, one of our privateers might take this run alone, and the other keep with the Bachelor and Dutch fleet. But the majority was against anything but going home with the Dutch fleet altogether, so that all I could do more was to remind them of examining the goods aboard the Bachelor, and to take out of her so much goods in safe package as would lie in the like room of European goods on board the Duchess, that if any accident should happen to the Bachelor, we might have part of her value in another bottom. I desired, if any amongst them were not of this opinion, they would give their reasons for the contrary in writing, but we could agree to nothing, so I was forced to yield to the majority of a committee to go home with the Dutch fleet, and having a good conveyance by 2 ships to advise our owners, I wrote 'em a full account of all our transactions since we left Grande, and all other matters relating to the voyage, and also sent what we had agreed in the committee to our owners, which was as follows. Gentlemen, at the Cape of Good Hope, this is to acquaint you of our safe arrival at the Cape of Good Hope, December 29th, 1710, with our prize, the Acapulco ship, called Nuestra Senora de l'Encarnacion y Desengaño, commanded by Mr. John Peshberty, and now called by us the Bachelor frigate, mounted with 20 great guns and 20 brass, and manned with 116 men, a firm ship, and each of our ships are manned with 120 men each, in company with 3 English East India ships, and do expect 3 sail more every day. The Dutch ships from Batavia, which are 12 sail of stout ships, are expected here every hour, and 6 sail more from Ceylon, which fleet we are resolved in council to accompany to Holland, except we have an account of peace, or happen to meet with an English convoy in crossing our latitudes. Our ships are all fitted with everything necessary, and only wait for the fleet, which we expect will sail by the last of March, hoping God will so direct us that we shall come with speed and safety to yourselves and the rest of our friends, to whom we render all due respects, and remain, gentlemen, your most humble and most obedient servants, Thomas Dover, President, William Stretton, Woodes Rogers, Charles Pope, Stephen Courtney, Thomas Glendall, Edward Cook, John Connolly, William Dampier, John Ballot, Robert Fry. We being now likely to spend so much time here, and the Duke having been very leaky all the way betwixt Batavia and this place, and considering the long passage we had to England, I moved to the council that we might go to Sardinia Bay to careen. 'Twas debated some time before betwixt me and Captain Courtney, pro and con, and to be further satisfied, on the 13th Captains Cook, Fry, and Stretton were appointed to come aboard, and we had a survey of carpenters concerning the leak. After some rummage, they agreed 'twould be very dangerous to attempt anything within board, and no other way but careening would do, which Captain Dover and the majority would not consent to, so that we are forced to lie in as bad condition as ever, only now and then mitigate the leak with a bonnet, which is of no long continuance in the harbor, and much less when we come to sea. This day, about noon, the Batavia fleet came in, being 11 sail. The fort saluted the flag with 21 guns, and all the English ships saluted likewise, except mine, which, being upon the heel, could not do it. February 26th. Having been very weak and kept my chamber for several days, but now something better, I send for most of my officers ashore, that I might be thoroughly satisfied what was wanting aboard, in order to go home with the Dutch fleet, and being too weak and made incapable of assisting to get anything, I delivered in the said account to Captains Dover, Courtney, and Cook, with the rest of the committee, that we might not be hurried to sea without necessaries for subsistence. On the 27th we made a rummage for bale goods to dispose of ashore, having leave of the governor, and provided a storehouse, where Captain Courtney, with the owner's agent, took their turns weekly during the sale of them. Nothing remarkable happened till the 3rd of April, but that on the 13th of March 4 Dutch ships came in from Ceylon, 3 of them having lost their main masts, and being otherwise much damaged by a violent storm they met with in latitude 18 south. I took in more water and provisions, sent more goods ashore to the storehouse, and disposed of 12 negroes. On the 28th of March a Portuguese ship from Brazil came in with advice that 5 stout French ships attempted Rio Janeiro, but were repulsed, and had a great number of men killed, and 400 taken prisoners by the Portuguese. April 3rd, being in a readiness to sail, the flag came off shore, and was saluted first by the Dutch, and then by all the English ships. But a contrary wind prevented our sailing. Most of the goods sold at the Cape were taken out of the Duke, being in much worse package than those aboard the Duchess and Bachelor, so that most of our bales that could be come at have been opened, and we find abundance of damage, our ship having been so leaky that we have not a tight place in the ship fit to secure dry goods. April 5. At daybreak this morning the flag hoisted a blue ensign, loosened his foretopsail, and fired a gun as a signal to unmoor. As we were heaving in our cable, it rubbed against the oakum, which had got into the leak, and occasioned the ship to be as leaky again as ever, she having been indifferent tight for some time, and we were in hopes it would have continued. About noon I came aboard very thin, and in no better health than I was when I went first ashore at our arrival here. Presently after I went aboard the flag, there being a signal made for all the English commanders. We had before received our orders, which were very particular, and as obligatory to be punctually observed. About 4 in the afternoon the flag, vice, and rear admirals weighed, with part of the fleet, and fell down to Robins or Penguin Island, where they lay for the rest of the ships. April 6. In the afternoon we all weighed from Penguin Island, 16 Dutch and 9 English ships, having a fresh breeze at south-southeast. At the Cape of Good Hope. We buried ashore here George Russell, a foremast man, December 30th, 1710. John Glasson died 5th of January. Mr. Carlton Van Brew, owner's agent, 3rd of February. Mr. Lancelot Appleby, 2nd mate, 21st, and 4 deserted. Here follows a list of the ships that arrived during our stay at the Cape. All those homeward bound are now in company with us, except Captain Opie in the Oli, and a Dane that sailed in February, designed home before us. The ships that arrived at the Cape while we were there: Donegal, Captain Cliff, found here, from Mocha, bound to England. A Dutch ship arrived January 6 from Batavia, and bound thither. Loyal Bliss, Captain Rob Hudson, arrived January 10 from Bengal, bound to England. A Dane arrived January 15 from Trincomber, bound to Denmark. A Dutch ship arrived January 16th from Zealand, bound for Batavia. Blenheim, Captain Parrott, January 22nd, arrived from Mocha, bound to England. Oli, Captain Opie, arrived January 25 from Batavia, bound for England. A Dutch ship arrived February 4th from Holland, bound to Batavia. The Batavia fleet, 11 ships, arrived February 22, bound to Holland. The Ceylon fleet, 4 ships, arrived March 7, bound for Holland. Loyal Cook, Captain Clark, arrived March 12 from China, bound for England. Carleton, Captain Lytton, arrived March 17 from Batavia, bound for England. King William, Captain Winter, arrived March 26 from Bengal, bound to England. A short description of the Cape of Good Hope. I shall not trouble the reader with what has been writ by others concerning this noted place, and since I had neither time, health, nor permission to ramble the country, I can relate no adventures that we had with bears, tigers, or Hottentots, but what I shall say is from my own observation, a description of the Cape of Good Hope. The Dutch have here a well-built small town containing about 250 houses, with a church and several fine gardens and small vineyards near it. There are divers villages in the country, from 10 to 30 miles distance, and scattering plantations near 100 miles from the Cape, so that from the whole they are supposed to be capable of raising 3,000 well-armed horse and foot at a short warning. The climate, being in about 35 south latitude, is excellent and healthful, and the soil very fruitful. They have many pleasant seats in the neighborhood, with gardens, vineyards, and plantations of young oaks and other trees raised by themselves, there being no large timber nearer than 50 miles off the Cape. I was informed that these farms and plantations bring in their East India Company a considerable sum per annum, besides maintenance for the garrison. They let the land so cheap for encouragement of planters, and it produces such a large increase of corn, wine, and cattle, that it enables the people to pay a great excise for their commodities, which are also continually exported for the Dutch settlements in India, and spent in recruiting their fleets that stop here, so that in a few years they hope this place will be so considerable as to afford them recruits on any occasion for their garrison in India, and if they be pressed by a war there, they may always lodge such a number of men as this noble settlement, which they esteem a second fatherland, as may arrive at India in so good a condition that no European power can be so capable of holding the India trade as themselves. This makes me think it to have been a great omission in our East India Company to quit this settlement for St. Helena, which is no way comparable to it, nor able to answer the same end. Among other advantages, the Dutch have here a noble hospital, furnished with physicians and surgeons as regularly as any in Europe, and this hospital is capable of entertaining 600 or 700 sick men at one time, so that as soon as the Dutch ships arrive here, their distempered men are put ashore, and they are supplied with fresh men in their stead. They have all sorts of naval stores here, with proper officers to attend on all occasions, which is a mighty addition to their strength, and enables them to preserve their India trade. An express comes hither annually from Holland by a small ship to meet their homeward-bound East India fleet, which is generally from 17 to 20 great ships. The express brings a private order to the commander-in-chief, who is appointed by the government in India, so that none knows where they are to meet their convoy in the North Seas but himself, and he gives it sealed up to each ship, to be opened in a proper latitude near home. By this method their fleets have for many years escaped the enemy, and arrived safe in Holland. Their form of government, their industry, and neatness abroad is justly to be admired and worthy to be imitated. I saw nothing I could blame, unless it be their severity, for which no doubt they have very good reason, though it seemed harsh to me, who was born with English liberty. They have an island called Robin, which lies at the entrance of the Cape Bay, about 3 leagues from the town, where they can find mutineers or other heinous offenders to hard labor during life, by sentence of the fiscal. The Dutch generally send a ship every year from hence to Madagascar for slaves, to supply their plantations, for the Hottentots, who are very numerous and love their liberty and ease so much that they cannot be brought to work, even though they should starve. I spoke with an English and an Irish man, who had been several years with the Madagascar pirates, but were now pardoned and allowed to settle here. They told me that those miserable wretches who had made such a noise in the world were now dwindled to between 60 or 70, most of them very poor and despicable, even to the natives, among whom they had married. They added that they had no embarkations but one ship and a sloop that lay sunk, so that those pirates are so inconsiderable that they scarce deserve to be mentioned. Yet if care not be taken after a peace to clear that island of them, and hinder others from joining them, it may be a temptation for loose straggling fellows to resort thither, and make it once more a troublesome nest of freebooters. The Dutch have seldom less than 500 soldiers in the Cape Castle, which is very large, built with stone, and has 70 guns well mounted on its ramparts, with convenient dwellings for the officers and soldiers, but it lies too deep in the bay to protect the ships in the road. Therefore they talk of erecting a battery on the starboard sandy point as you enter the bay. The road is so much exposed to the sea that in the winter months, when the wind blows strong from thence, it is unsafe riding, and ships are very often lost here, so that whoever comes hither in that season ought to be well provided with cables and anchors to ride out a storm. But in the summer it seldom blows from the sea, yet scarce a day passes without very strong flaws at southeast, which come down from the Table Mountains that lie over the fort, so violently that boats cannot go to or from the ships but in the morning and evening, when it is generally very moderate and calm. The Dutch have found out a noble hot spring of water about 100 miles up in the country, which is of excellent virtue against all distempers contracted in India, so that few have been carried thither, though in a desperate condition, but they have recovered to admiration by drinking and bathing in that water. This place having been so frequently described by others, I shall only add that I found the character of the Hottentots to be very true, and that they scarce deserve to be reckoned of the human kind. They are such ill-looked, stinking, nasty people. Their apparel is the skins of beasts. Their chief ornament is to be very greasy and black, so that they besmear themselves with stinking oil or tallow and soot, and the women twist the guts of beasts or thongs of hides round their legs, which resembles a tobacco roll. Here's plenty of all sorts of beasts and fowl, wild and tame, and in short there's nothing wanting at the Cape of Good Hope for a good subsistence, nor is there any place more commodious for a retirement to such as would be out of the noise of the world than the adjacent country in possession of the Dutch. Nothing remarkable happened till the 1st of May, only I continued very ill, as my ship did leaky, and sometimes we, sailing from the Cape towards Europe, had thunder, lightning, rain, and squalls of wind. Yesterday afternoon we had sight of the island of St. Helena, bearing north-west by north, about 6 leagues, lying in south latitude 16. On the 7th we made the island of Ascension, south latitude 8-2, longitude west from London 13-20. On the 14th at noon we found we had just crossed the equator, being the 8th time we had done so in our course round the world. There was a strong current setting to the northward, after the rate of about 1 mile an hour, longitude west from London 21-11, so that we have run much continually to the westward, over and above the circumference of the globe. The 17th, in latitude 3-13, we found the current still continuing to set to the northwest 20 miles in 24 hours. The Dutch Commodore was very civil to us, and because our prize sailed heavy, he allowed her to keep ahead in the night, which he did not to any other ship. We and the Duchess often towed her in the day to keep her up with the fleet. June 7, in the latitude of 24:55. The 3 admirals hauled down their flags and hoisted pennants at their main topmast heads to appear more like ships of war, every Dutch ship doing the same. Now we draw near home, they scrape and clean their ships, bending new sails, so that they look as if they newly come out of Holland. June 13. Yesterday afternoon the flag made a signal for all the Dutch commanders to go aboard with their latitude and longitude. We took the Bachelor in tow this morning, having a fine moderate gale at east by north, with smooth pleasant weather. June 14. We cast the Bachelor off about 5 yesterday afternoon, I being unwilling to run too far ahead with her. Now we are got so far to the northward, where we may expect not only the danger of the enemy, but also veerable winds and thick weather, by which means she may lose the fleet. I advised Captain Courtney the same in the evening by a letter. This morning we rummaged our hold and found very little new damage amongst the bales, but all in general much decayed by lying so long in ordinary package. June 15. The Admiral made a signal this morning for all the English commanders and some of the Dutch skippers to come aboard him, where we found an excellent entertainment, and the good humour of the Dutch Admiral soon made all the company understand each other without a linguist, though we had much ado to get one at first meeting. We parted before the sunset, and had a fine day. June 28. Being got into the latitude of 51 north, we had thick, foggy weather, so that the flag fired 2 guns every half hour. Each ship answered with 1. This continued several days, which consumed a great deal of powder, but by the noise of the guns it was easy to keep company, though sometimes so thick for several hours that we could not see 3 ships' lengths. July 14. This morning we fancied we saw land, and some of the Dutch ships made the concerted signal, but none was positive, having sounded and found no ground with above 100 fathom of line. July 15. We saw 2 ships yesterday afternoon, one of which we spoke with, being a Dane bound for Ireland. She told us the wars still continued, but gave a very imperfect account of any other news. She informed us of the Dutch men of war that were cruising for us off Shetland, being 10 sail, whom she saw 4 or 5 days ago, and reckoned herself now about 40 leagues from the land. We had soundings then in 70 fathom water, brown gravelly ground. I just had time to send the owners a copy of my letters from the Cape of Good Hope, and to let them know we were now got so far safe towards the conclusion of a fatiguing voyage. In the morning we made Fair Island and Foul Island, lying off Shetland, presently after we saw the men of war, but having little wind, and they a good way distant from each other, we could join but one of them by noon. Fair Island then bore south-southeast, distant about 2 leagues. July 16. All the men of war joined us yesterday afternoon, but 1 or 2 with the fishing doggers, who were cruising off the northeast of Shetland. After mutual salutations, both by the Dutch and English ships, one of the men of war was sent out to see for the missing ships. Meanwhile the fleet lay by, and having little wind, the boats came to and fro all night, and supplied us with what we wanted. The inhabitants of those islands came aboard with what provisions they had, being very poor people, who subsist most by fishing. Arrival at the Texel, July 17. In the morning we had a small breeze, with which the men of war got into the fleet again, having met with the other. About noon we all made sail, steering away betwixt south, southeast, and southeast, and the winds at southwest and southwest by south. I wrote a single letter to the owners in general by a Scots fishing boat belonging to Shetland, advising them of our joining the men of war, who are ordered with the fleet to the Texel, where I hope we shall soon meet an English convoy. The Dutch India Admiral, though but a company's ship, wears his flag, and gives signals and orders to the Dutch men of war, which is not suffered among the English, and in the whole run from the Cape have kept an exact discipline in the fleet, not suffering any of the commanders to go out of the ships to visit each other at sea without his signal or leave. July 21. This morning one of the men of war was ordered away for the Texel, to give notice of the fleet's coming. I again wrote to the owners, for fear of any miscarriage by the former conveyances. July 23rd. The weather being close, the Commodore made a signal about 10 o'clock for seeing land. Presently, after all, the fleets answered him with their colours. The pilot boats coming off aboard the ships, we had 2 aboard, who told us the Texel bore about southeast by east, distant 15 or 16 miles. Presently after noon we parted with the Rotterdam and Middleborough ships, most of the men of war going with them to see him safe in. The flag and all the English ships saluted the Commodore, and afterwards we saluted the flag himself to welcome him in sight of Holland. And as soon as they got over the bar, the Dutchmen fired all their guns for joy of their safe arrival in their own country, which they very affectionately call Fatherland. All the ships bound into the Texel lay by from 2 till 5 o'clock, waiting for the flood to carry us up. About 8 at night we all came safe to an anchor in 6 fathom water, about 2 miles offshore. On the 24th in the morning the Dutch flag weighed in order to go up to the unlivering place. As he passed by us we gave him 3 huzzas and 9 guns. In the afternoon I went up to Amsterdam, where we had letters from our owners to direct us how to act and proceed from hence. On the 28th the English East India ships had orders to be in readiness for sailing with the first Dutch convoy for London. We got some provisions aboard from Amsterdam on the 30th. When I came aboard on the 1st of August, by consent of our council, we discharged what men we'd shipped at Batavia and the Cape, and afterwards went away from Amsterdam. On the 4th, the Duchess and Bachelor went up to the road, called the Vlictor, being a better road than the Texel. In the evening we had news of some of our owners being at the Helder. Mr. Pope went to wait upon him, and in the morning came aboard with them. After a short stay they went for the Duchess and Bachelor, designing thence for Amsterdam. We welcomed them with 15 guns at their coming and going. The English East India ships and others bound for England weighed with the Dutch convoy today, having a fine gale at northeast. On the 6th we weighed from the Texel and went up to our consorts, it being by a particular order from the owners for our better security, we being obliged to wait there, fearing the India Company would be troublesome, although we had dealt for nothing but necessaries in India. On the 10th in the afternoon the owners with the chief officers came down, and the next day went ashore to the Texel, where, having an abstract of our voyage ready drawn up, we went before a notary public, and took our affidavits, that what was therein contained was true to the best of our knowledge, and that we had been at no other places than therein mentioned. This was desired of us by James Holland, Esquire, one of our owners, to justify our proceedings to the Queen and Council, in answer to what the East India Company had to allege against us, they being, as we were informed, resolved to trouble us, on pretence we had encroached upon their liberties in India. On the 12th we returned aboard again, to keep up a form of government. Though the owners were here, we held a committee, where it was agreed to carry a quantity of gold to Amsterdam, to exchange for a supply of our men and ships, viz. 20 guilders to a sailor, 10 to a landman, and to every officer in proportion as his occasions required. On the 13th we went away for Amsterdam, but did not carry any gold out of our ships, upon consideration it might be prejudicial to the insurance made on our ships, if we took any value out, and an accident should afterwards happen, so we agreed again 'twould be better to take up the money at Amsterdam. We had several stores and provisions from Amsterdam this week, and likewise money for the officers and men, which was paid them, and they had liberty to go ashore by turns. Transactions in Holland. On the 23rd in the afternoon the owners came down from Amsterdam, and the next day examined the prisoners aboard us and the Bachelor, about taking the said ship and other prizes, having notice of our going over for England, and that a convoy was appointed to come for us. We got all the men offshore who had been very troublesome to the owners at Amsterdam, and everything in readiness for sailing. On the 31st Mr. Holland came aboard, the rest of the owners being gone over for England, and took account of what plate, gold, pearl, etc. was in the ship. The same being done aboard the Duchess, he likewise took a list of our men to get protections for them from being impressed after our arrival in the river of Thames. The next day he went to the Texel to discharge the custom due from our ships, and on the 5th in the morning he took his leave of us. On the 19th in the afternoon we had news of our convoys lying without the Texel, which was very acceptable to the crews of each ship, who were in the utmost uneasiness at our long stay, being just at home, so that we had much ado to keep the companies aboard till now. We got everything in readiness in order for falling down to them. On the 20th, about 5 in the afternoon, we got down to the Texel, where we found our convoy at anchor, being the Essex, Canterbury, Medway, and Dunwich men of war. On the 22nd in the morning, the wind being at northeast, we weighed from the Texel, and by 10 of the clock got clear of the channel. In the afternoon the Commodore took the Bachelor in tow, and next morning, the wind being against us, we bore away again for the harbour, as did likewise 4 Dutch men of war that came out with us, bound for London. After seeing us safe in, he stood off to the northward with the Canterbury and Medway, but came in the next morning. On the 25th our officers met, where consulting that our 3 ships wanted several necessaries to keep the sea, in case we should meet with bad weather, we requested Captain Roffey, our Commodore, that he would please to stay, should the wind be fair, till such time as we could be provided with the said necessaries from Amsterdam, which was granted. On the 13th, the wind continuing at southeast by south and southeast, at break of day we weighed, as did likewise 4 Dutch men of war. On the 1st of October, about 11 of the clock, we came to an anchor in the Downs, where several of our owners came aboard, and after they had visited every ship, went ashore with some prisoners to examine them about our capture, etc. At 3 this morning the Essex made a signal to unmoor, and betwixt 9 and 10 weighed, he being ordered up to the buoy in the Nore, and we to make the best of our way to the Hope. October 14th. This day at 11 of the clock, we and our consort and prize got up to the Erith, where we came to an anchor, which ends our long and fatiguing voyage. Finis. End of section 20. Recording by Wayne Anderson, Chelsea, Quebec. End of A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers.